several things on the agenda, and in the essence of time, we're going to make one adjustment. We're going to deal with 3.02 first before 3.01. But before that, Mrs. Smith, public input. Yes, ma'am, please.
So I don't know, I thought they called this the hot seat. This is weird. This is weird. I just have a few comments. One, I want to say that tomorrow evening, you're welcome to come and join us. I hope Tyler will be there, but we have our community school dinner tomorrow at Leesburg Elementary School, where we are providing some food. We have a little over 100 parents that have reserved to come and speak, and we're going to do some small group activity to try to see where we go from here as to how we help some of the community in the school at that point. So hope to see you there. I know Diane's going to be there. So next, it's not really budget, but I know budget is on there on the agenda. But I spoke to somebody this morning on my way into the office, and it brought a lot of everything that we talk a lot about, retaining teachers and talking. Of course, this is the transfer week, and so we have a lot of people that are wanting to transfer. Some of them are because they were not reappointed. We are hearing more and more of administrators that have not reappointed their teachers. This particular person decided that they were hired just a few months ago, and they did have their informal and their formal. As far as they were concerned, everything was fine. Asked about a mentor. Did admit there were some issues with some classroom management, which is some things that can be helped if they have a mentor. Has asked and asked, not provided a mentor, didn't know who they were. Thought a coach was the mentor, and the coach was adamantly about, nope, I'm not your mentor, type idea. And this to me is, I don't want to say frustrating, but lack of a better word, it is, because we need to retain our teachers. And we're hearing a lot more of, again, not a good fit, going in a different direction. And all year we've had openings. And I understand that not as many as some districts. I will agree to that. That is true. But we need to find something to help these teachers. And I'm going to say it, the mentors are needed, and maybe we need to understand that some of the leadership, kind of give them a little, I don't want to say a break, but try to see if there is maybe another fit for them. If they're not a good fit, okay, maybe they're another fit somewhere else. We need to really help the teachers to try to retain these, because we're losing them. We're losing them, unfortunately. And hopefully the budget is going to help us out with some of that also. So we'll see. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start with 3.02, update on the attendance boundaries. Ms. Randall? And we have a public input card after you have a seat, ma'am. I guess we need to also allow the Honorable Pat Kelly to have a seat at the table. He's the mayor of Mineola.
Just so y'all are aware, the camera is out. I don't know if you heard that, which is why we're using the table today for our public input,
no.
in case you were curious.
Yes, I was very curious.
All right. Do we have our presentation?
Yes.
Okay, we'll get it loaded up. Board Chair, Superintendent, board members, I don't know, maybe Carolee, do you want to speak first, or?
If you don't mind, first off, it's kind of amazing, attendance boundaries, and we're kind of at the same table and not arguing each other. We've been going through this for 20 years with this specific area. First of all, I just want to comment on the process was great this time compared to previous years. Staff was amazing. They did a lot of the heavy lifting. I think they came up with some great opportunities. So I can't commend them enough that this was just a great process, and I think you've got something that works, and you've got a great team. So,
Thank you. All right, Well, on that note, thank you very much, Mary Kelly. And I will say it has
So do we want to
been,
cut it short and you just tell us which one to go with?
To clarify that, today I'm going to give you information. They've come up with two great options. Honestly, in my house, my wife and I are divided on the options. My city manager are divided on the options. So I really respect y'all's decision. Whatever y'all decide, it's going to be a tough one. I'm just giving you here to give you information, and then y'all do your thing. Y'all are the professionals on how to do this. But yes, they got it down to two difficult decisions, but I think they weeded out a lot of good ones. Go ahead.
well, for the purposes today, we're really just here to kind of tell you where we are, how we got there, and then, how to move forward with basically the public input process. So obviously, the purposes for this, can I do this? Yes, I can, yay. All right, so obviously, the purposes are that we have a new school, a K-8 school opening in Mineola next year. And a reminder, this is not effective this coming school year. This is effective in the 25-26 school year. So, we like to get out here ahead of the process, give it time to play through, let all the parents and community adjust. And then that way we have all that time to kind of work individually with families to make sure that, they're getting the best results for their students. So we are here to do an attendance boundary adjustment to accommodate the new school. We are providing relief for the existing schools. Right now, the school that's most affected by this is Grassy Lake Elementary School, which if you have Mr. Dodd knows, it is.
I taught one of those portables.
Yes. We have been adding portables for, I think, just about the time since it was built. And it is a very fast-growing area. The hills of Mineola is developing very, very quickly. And as the mayor just, told us, they have more development coming in that area. So we want to try to accommodate that and get ahead of it a little bit, as much as we can. So again, it is the Grassy Lake Relief School. It had the potential to affect quite a few of our elementary and middle schools in the South County area. The final options that we're presenting to you don't affect quite as many of them, but, we involved all of those principals as we went through the process. And then we had a lot of discussion about the conversion charter school attendance boundaries. On consulting with the school board attorney, the final result is that if the conversion charters want an attendance boundary, then really we are under the obligation to provide them with an attendance boundary. So then we had quite a few conversations with those conversion charter principals, and they took them back, obviously, to their boards and talked. Mineola Charter has specifically said they do not want an attendance boundary. So this process eliminates that attendance boundary. The other three do want an attendance boundary. So Mascot, Round Lake, and Spring Creek have all asked for one. We thought about swapping primary and secondary boundaries, and actually with some of the language that we have added to our school locator map that clarifies that, conversion charter capacity is just that. Spots are available if there's capacity at that school. We haven't had nearly as many concerns as we have had over the years with that. So it's kind of become if it's not broke, don't fix it. And so basically, we'd like to propose that we just move forward with the status quo for Round Lake, Round Lake, Mascot, and Spring Creek. Basically, no changes to their situation. Mineolas will be eliminated through this process.
May I ask a question? If a charter school has an attendance boundary, a conversion, are we able to use that in our calculations for seats?
We do include it, yes, it is in our concurrency capacity
So
calculations.
Mineola, we were not able to.
We would actually still continue to include them because they are still a conversion charter. They just don't have an attendance boundary. So the conversion charters will still be included in our concurrency capacity and our calculations.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? I know that might be a little bit of a.
I do have
surprise.
one. The other schools, other than Mineola, will still have a primary and a secondary attendance. So a
Yes.
parent that's in the primary attendance doesn't have to attend the charter if they opt not to.
They do not have to attend the charter, and again, the student space is based on whether there's capacity at that charter. So if they go into kindergarten, they still have to go through the lottery system for the charter.
Thank you.
They do not, and we're clarifying our language on that as well, to make sure that they know.
You talked about, you've clarified some language on the locator map or something along those lines to,
Mm-hmm.
'cause, you know, I guess if I were just moving to the area and I plug myself in and I see the primary, I think that's where I'm going. But then
So
I'd be
now-
surprised that they're full.
Right, so now what it says is it gives you both the primary and the secondary, and then under the primary, it says this is a charter school, to some effect. This is a charter school. You need to contact the charter school, and your student space would be dependent on capacity at that charter school. So basically, it clarifies that, we can't guarantee a space there.
Just as we couldn't guarantee though, if I were brand new to the area
Mm-hmm.
and I do my locator, I would call the charter school first before I would call the school that's in our system because the other one's listed as the primary. Why wouldn't we list ourselves as the primary? Because then they're more likely ending up in our school, right, versus the charter?
Right. It seems to, it doesn't seem to have an effect, right? So I think there are areas like Spring Creek where we actually want them to consider them as their primary, right? So in the interest of keeping consistency, if we don't change Spring Creeks, then we don't necessarily want to change the others. That's kind of my thought process on it. And, I'm open to that discussion if other people have different opinions. It basically became we're not having as much of a problem with it. We're not getting a lot of questions about it. So, and there is a legal process that we would have to go to switch the primary and secondary. So it was in the interests of less confusion and less, honestly, fewer costs, because we have to do the legal advertisement, we have to go through that whole process to switch the primary and secondary.
So, follow up. So if the charter school isn't bound, even if they have an attendance boundary to take the child, then it seems that Mineola may have had the better position of not having an attendance boundary. Because that parent's going to say, well, I live in that attendance boundary. I should be able to go to the school, right?
And that was a big source of confusion and frustration over the years, that
Oh, yeah.
they'd call up the primary, 'cause they live across the street, they think that they're gonna go there. Oh, no, actually, you don't go there. Then they see Grassy Lake, they think they're going there too. No, you're actually not going there either. Your secondary boundary is Astatula. What?
Yeah.
I can see two schools, why am I not going to either one of them?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I will say my life will definitely be easier without Mineola having an attendance boundary.
But why would we want the others to have one then?
It is in state statute that basically says that a conversion charter
Can,
can have a boundary, or should have a boundary.
but they're not bound to take the child. It's in the
If
boundary.
there's a capacity issue, they don't have to take them.
They don't have to reserve seats, like in a public school, if you live in this area,
They
you're gonna
they have to
figure
give
it
a
out.
preference, they have to give a preference to students within the original boundary before they were a conversion charter school. But beyond that, it's all a matter of capacity. And they put them in a lottery.
So building off of that, what is the benefit to the other three for maintaining their attendance boundaries? Why would they choose to keep those from your
It
perspective?
probably is because they show up on our school locator map. So, so then they are able to, have there's a market there, right?
it's a form of advertising, right?
It's a
I mean,
form
you
of
show up, you
advertising,
move to the
exactly.
neighborhood, and you Google, you figure out which school you're supposed to go to. It's gonna tell me I'm supposed to go to Mascot Charter. Okay. So now they get students that they might not have otherwise acquired.
Although Mascot Charter in that case is their closest school, right? And same thing with Spring Creek. So especially in Spring Creek's case, I mean.
That's the only
you
one
know,
that makes total sense for them.
Yeah, students who are in Astor, we want them to
Yeah.
pick Spring Creek as
I-
their first choice.
I 100%, 1,000% understand Spring Creek. Want,
Yeah.
the boundary there.
But,
The
you know,
mascot
it's-
one, I'm a little wavery on, but
Yeah, but I mean, even in Mascot, because they're out on the edge, there are students who are definitely much closer. And
Round
we'll,
Lake is
we'll
much
transport them if they don't choose Mascot, right? So,
So then in Mineola's perspective, Mineola Charter, removing their attendance boundary means they're removed from the school locator, but that doesn't matter as much then because they're already at capacity or near all these developments and have the natural
I
marketing that
think
goes
they,
with it.
yeah,
Okay.
I think it's much easier for
That
them
makes
to
sense.
market to their community.
Got it.
I mean, if there's a board direction through the superintendent to look at swapping those, we certainly can do that. I mean, that's just,
Cool.
we kind of had arrived at if it's not broke, don't fix it. But if the feeling is that it's broke and we do want to fix it, we can certainly do that.
Okay.
All right. Back to, I think I must have switched that. So of course, these are the same guiding principles that we use for all of our attendance boundary processes. We want to balance capacity. We want to minimize the disruption. You'll hear a little bit more about that as we go. We want to balance to the extent that we're able, diversity. And we want to provide as compact as possible boundaries. That's not always as easy as we'd like it to be, but we try. We try to strive for clean articulation patterns, so the feeder patterns to middle and/or high schools. We try to make sure that we're being consistent in that. Consider all the student educational needs. And of course, we try to be as transparent as possible as we go through this process. So, this is the first step in that transparency. And then we will, you'll hear more about our other methods of making sure that the community is aware of this. And then in this particular case, oh my gosh, I just keep going through here. I don't know how I do this. In this particular case, of course, we had an agreement with the city of Mineola regarding this school. And so there were provisions in there about the attendance boundary. And so we're trying to comply with those as much as possible. And the mayor has really been very good about working with us on what that means. So we appreciate that. All right, so our process, we developed several options. We started with 4. And we took those to a meeting with the principals, heard a lot of feedback from those affected principals, and went back to the drawing board, also had a discussion with the mayor about, what those terms of the MOU mean. And so that opened up some possibilities for us. We got up to option 9, met with Mrs. Foster, who has also been with us through this entire process, and then came up with options 9A and 9B as we went through the process. Met with the principals again to discuss those options, met with Mayor Kelly and Mr. Johnson to discuss those, and also then met with transportation, with the leadership cabinet, and with the city of Claremont. And I think at this point, we kind of have narrowed it down to what generally we feel like is a good option, or a couple of good options. So a couple of things to talk about just in the process. So when you look at these numbers, there are total students, which includes all students attending or assigned to school in the area, which includes the conversion and non-conversion charter schools. District students are just those traditional district students. So as you go through, you see the various options, 1 through 9B. The first table in this chart gave you the total numbers on the top side, and then the district numbers on the bottom. So you see if you just look at the totals, you see there's about 5,000 students, plus or minus, who are in conversion and non-conversion charters in this area. And so we kind of assume that parents who are making that choice of a district school are going to continue to do a district school. Or if they opt out and go to a conversion charter or charter school, then, other parents will then kind of move into that place. So, Helen is much better at the numbers on this, so if you have any questions specifically about numbers, I'm going to call her up here, but, but otherwise, when we kind of got to 9 and 9B, we felt like those were the kind of the most balanced numbers that we saw through the process, especially when you looked at district schools. And they also brought the population down where we kind of needed it to go down, and left it stable where we kind of needed it to stay stable. Couple of the highlights, options 9 and 9B, we actually do not touch. I'm sorry, I was about to tell you something wrong. Option 9, we do not touch Aurelia Cole Academy, which, we had just redistricted for that 2 years ago. They have opened. They are actually much more popular even than I think I thought they would be. And the numbers were a little higher and more unpredictable than we thought they would be. But option 9 does not touch that. Option 9B does to some extent, and otherwise, it is mostly Astatula, Tavares, Grassy Lake that are affected by this at the elementary school level.
May I ask the mayor a question?
Sure.
Can you articulate for me the 9 where we don't touch, the ones that were transferred to Aurelia Cole? Some history behind that and.
Yeah, I have it's not the perfect map, I don't have this is me at 7 o'clock this morning. I'm just going to show this is a map. Full disclosure, 9 is actually where I live, not with this area.
9B.
9B is where I live. This part of Mineola, for 20 years, before I got involved in politics, I was very much involved in the school board issues, because I had a child that went through the school. This section that gets affected has pretty much just been hammered by the school board in every redistricting possible. When I first moved there, the subdivision went to 2 separate schools. One went to Claremont, one went to Mineola. It went to a different middle school. One went to Claremont Middle School. One went to Gray, to Gray. And then during some redistricting, this is kind of where we kind of separated and we went heads with the school board, is they took this area and they rezoned them to Astatula to fit Grassy Lake. And I'm not sure, because we all of a sudden we woke up one morning and it got redistricted. That's kind of where we came to Butts' previous administration. And since then, we've built a great relationship, and we've been very open communication. So this one gets moved back and forth. So basically, between the two is this one area. And the decision goes, where does it stay at Amelia Cole, which you, again, just rezoned it last year to Amelia Cole, kind of taking it out of Astatula, which we appreciate. Do you move those kids again? So that's pretty much where we're at now. That's where it comes to you as a board to decide. Like I said, personally, in my household, I can speak on my behalf. This is not as the mayor, this is a parent. My opinions, because my wife has the exact opposite opinion of me. And the superintendent knows that my city manager and staff have another. This makes your decision difficult to make. Both of them are great choices. It's just how do you go? The point is, when you look at the map, the blue area is basically the piece that looks at things that I just want to disclose that's happened in my city since they started doing this. It's happened in the last 6 months. Is 1, 2, and 3. That is actually going to be the first set of workforce housing that comes into the city. That's going to be hundreds of houses. 300 houses, and then we just got notice that they're going to build another one. And that's something that Mineola can do. So that's not working your numbers. So those are actually, with either way you go, those are going to flow to the new school. The big X on the top, that is actually going to be 800 more houses that got approved a couple months ago. We have a lot of growth in the Hills area with Advent, Crooked Can, not saying the kids are going to go to Crooked Can. But I'm just saying we have that, there's a major influx and there's a big demand for Mineola. So when you look at the two, the natural barrier is 27. So and you're going to have to keep me on, the first one on 9, it actually keeps everybody at Amelia Cole and everybody settled. And then 9B actually will take this piece out and shift them to Mineola. But if you do that, in my opinion, you're setting up for future overcrowding at the new school if you shift them over. One of my reasons that I moved to Lake County was continuity of education. It was very important to me when I grew up that I graduated high school with the same people I went to elementary school with. I think it just gives stability to the kids. I can say my daughter is a product of Lake County Schools. She did very well, and I have no problem. She went to South Lake High School. I have no problem with the schools. I think it's very much about the teachers and the teachers all want to be successful. The thing that you don't see on this map is the defining line of 27. If my child was to go to the new school in B, when she went to high school, she would actually go to South Lake High School. That is the major piece that you don't see. You see the middle school, so you have continuity till you get to the high school level, and then that kid is going to shift and go back to South Lake High School. It's 27 is this natural barrier that comes down. So you look for those natural barriers. I've learned that through all the redistricting, is you look for these like, compared to years ago, it's like, oh, look, neighborhood in and out. It's pretty much, I lived in that world. So that's it, but I think that's the major difference between the two is this one parcel. That from my speaking, now speaking on behalf of my wife, senior staff, my city managers, their position is the agreement that we had with the school board is that we would try to keep Mineola whole because we've got ripped apart so much we went to 4 different elementary schools, 3 different middle schools, 2 different high schools. Mr. Mathias remembers those brutal meetings when it got nasty, that we try to keep together. I'm very realistic that you can't do that in school board. I mean, you tried. They gave 110%. They gave their best effort, and they're like, what do we do with this one piece? I think we just tried that you did the best effort, and that's what they did. So then it comes to you and the numbers of letting you know that there is some future growth. I know you shouldn't be like planning, I'm told that you can't build schools till the houses come, but there is that part of you need to be aware of what is coming into Mineola. And that's pretty much it. Is that what you were looking for? Yes. But I'll support whatever you as a board. Y'all just have a tough decision, and I'm glad it's yours, not mine, because I like my wife.
I think you really captured what my theory was going to be perfectly. That because I know some folks in this neighborhood as well.
Yes.
Who are excited about the performing arts opportunities that Amelia Cole had to offer, that they left other schools to now go there. And then I think, okay, are these people going to get frustrated that, wait a second here, we just started there and now we're leaving, and they had some offerings that we were really excited about. Meanwhile, you have some other folks that say, but I can practically see the school when I come out of my neighborhood there onto 27. Shouldn't I be going that way? And it's going to be, I don't know. I'm interested. Like if you were to poll the entire neighborhood, they might end up 50-50.
Yeah, you're going to be some people that will be disappointed. For me, the things that I've learned from Mr. Mathias and learning is safety. You've got a bus that's going to, if you put the kids out there, you've got a bus that's going to cross 27 to the right turn, left turn. You keep everybody whole on that piece. They can come out of the neighborhood, go straight down Lakeshore Drive to go to Amelia Cole Avenue. Again, there is that part of, there is that school of thought that all of Mineola needs to stay together, and it's like, it doesn't work. This is not the only part of Mineola. There is a part that's south of this in Old Mineola and to the west of 27. It is going to Amelia Cole. So there is part of Mineola that's going to Amelia Cole. This is not the one part of Mineola that is not going to go to Amelia Cole. That is not going to go to the new school. I mean, we got people going to Amelia Cole. It's for y'all to decide, where it is. But like I said, they've done an amazing job. It's just the discussion of where you as a board feels, do you do the short term? But to your point, Mr. Dodd, in the last 4 years in my neighborhood, working with you, and you'll do some rezoning for the Astatula, then the Mineola Charter coming in, making a primary. If you had a kid that started in kindergarten and in sixth grade, they've had opportunity as a primary school to go to Grassy Lake. I think it was Grassy Lake got zoned to Astatula, got zoned to Mineola Charter. You got one family that, a kid who started school that's gotten rezoned every year, they got touched every year. So I'm just saying, think long-term and just try to leave this neighborhood alone after this one.
Can you speak a little bit more to the high school discussion? Because I looked through the packet, there wasn't a high school map. I just want to double check. So
Sure.
if I'm looking
So-
at option 9,
So option 9, basically all the students who are zoned for K-8FF would go to Lake Minneola High School. On option 9B, the boundary between South Lake High School and Lake Minneola High School is US 27. So those students in Oak Valley area and that area that we're proposing in option 9B, those students would be at K-8FF, but unlike the remainder of their classmates, they would go to South Lake High School.
And that is important to some, and you have some that feel to the part of, I want my kid to go to Mineola High School, it's a better school. My child is a product of South Lake High School. I will defend it till the day I die. It was a great school. My daughter did very well there. She just finished her doctorate and does anesthesiology. So it's just because you went to South Lake High School doesn't mean you can't have a successful career. It's all based off the teachers and the student. So-
well, and I was specifically asking because I think, I think one of you made the statement that stay with your cohort, right? So
Yeah,
that's
and-
where I was going versus school. which-
Right, but from the aspect of that, it was very important when I graduated from high school that I went to high school, I graduated with the same people I went to elementary school
Right.
with.
Right.
My daughter was married, 8 years ago, or 9 years ago, whatever. The people at her wedding were people that she went to elementary school with. And that was important to her, is getting that bond of friendship and making them go through everything, and how can you keep them together the most? And now it's being so competitive with sports, you have all these kids, and then you're gonna have this small cluster of kids that are gonna be the new kids at the high school. And high school is already difficult enough, to build those relationships at 9th grade and stuff like that. So that was something that wasn't in here, but I just thought it needed to be said, as the 27 is a defining line.
So what happens to the mayor's point and to, I almost said Dr. Luke, Mrs. Luke? What happens to those kids regardless, 9 or 9B, that one community on the other side of 27? Do they,
So in 9, they would go to South Lake High, they'd go to Aurelia Cole, and all of those students go to South Lake High School, are zoned for South Lake High School. In 9B, they would go to K-8FF, but then they would go to South Lake High School.
they still end up in South Lake on 9B?
They'd still be at South Lake, right.
So I think it does make some sense for the continuity. I agree with you there.
Yeah.
So I will say that's not I just want to walk through, because there are other affected families as well. So I want to make sure that you're kind of aware of all of, okay, that doesn't really show there. All of the various changes. So the vast majority of it is that the area of K-8FF is basically right now zoned for primarily Astatula and then some for Grassy Lake. So basically, the northern part that is currently zoned for Astatula would go to K-8FF. The southern part currently zoned for Grassy Lake would go to K-8FF. That affects Astatula, brings some of their numbers down.
What is their population right now at
Oh,
Astatula?
gosh, you're going to ask me hard questions about numbers. Helen?
It is currently 637.
And how many kids are we going to pull away from there?
That's, the bottom of Astatula would be about 83 students.
So there's some room for relief at Tavares Elementary School. So the area on the north side that you see that's kind of hash marked, those are students who are currently zoned for Tavares Elementary School. It's that kind of Lane Park cutoff, Frankie's Road area. And we propose that those students be rezoned for Astatula. Distance-wise, they are just about equidistant between Tavares Elementary on the north and Astatula on the south.
Would that make up for that population loss?
Yes, the Tavares crosshatch up at the top is approximately 71 students versus that 83 at the bottom.
Have we had meetings with the parents in that area?
We have not, that's actually
'Cause
where
I
we're
haven't heard
going from
anything.
here.
Okay.
Right, so, so we come to you guys, talk about where we're at.
Okay.
Get your permission to move forward with public input and which options you want to move forward for public input.
Okay.
It just makes it simpler if we're not putting out 11 options for parents to choose
Can I
from.
ask a question? It's not my area. 9A, 9 and 9B, they both have the same effect on Tavares.
Yes.
Yeah, so it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. So again, it
Right,
comes
that
back.
one doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the only difference between those two options is just that Oak Valley
Okay.
area. So as you go down, you see where the differences for Grassy Lake would now be that blue boundary. The area crosshatched off the east side of US 27 is the area that is currently zoned for Astatula. Those students will no longer be transported north by, I don't know, at this point, 15 schools to go to Astatula. I'm joking about the 15, there's only 2. So they would be zoned for Grassy Lake Elementary School. And then there are actually no other changes except for that Oak Valley area that we talk about a lot. On the middle school side, what it does is that the students that are now going to K-8FF are coming out of Eastridge Middle School. So that actually brings Eastridge's numbers down by quite a bit. And so in order to balance those, because of course Windy Hill Middle School is in a very high-growth area with Wellness Way, then we would actually, the areas that are kind of crosshatched to it's the Johns Lake, Magnolia Point watermark area on the east side south of 50, and then the kind of Lake Louisa area on the west side. We would propose to redistrict those students to Eastridge Middle School. So transportation-wise, they're pretty much equal. I will say Eastridge Middle and Windy Hill Middle are very close geographically. It is very hard to draw an attendance boundary line between those two. So that's basically how we would balance those numbers and make sure that we're having the best efficiency of our capacity. But still trying to provide for a good option for students.
Kelly, I've got one for you. Just from attendance boundary shapes perspective, so that little chunk north of 50, east of 27, that's for Arroyo Cole, kind of in the heel of the orange section, those kids would go to South Lake High School as well, correct?
The circle portion?
So that purple portion across 27.
You're talking about the one that I always call the bump.
The bump
The
works too,
Citrus
yeah.
Tower bump. Gosh, you know what? I cannot say right now exactly where they go to high school. My brain is trying to.
The only reason I bring that up is
Figure it
because,
out.
like, from my practicality mind's point of view, I like option 9 just because of the clean lines, not crossing 27. But I'm just trying to figure out, as we're doing it down below, to me, it makes sense. You're right there on 50, so then it's probably an easier drive to South Lake if they're going to South Lake. But just trying to make sure we're being as consistent as we
They
can
are
with
either
different
Eastridge
scenarios.
High or Lake Mineola High. They are not South Lake High.
Okay. So then we're already,
Yeah, so I can't
and it's
say
never clean, but
exactly
we're already
which one.
theoretically splitting some kids from Arroyo
Yeah,
Cole
we
where they're
actually,
going to
so there
high
was an
school.
option, one of the options actually looked at trying to move that to Grassy Lake, but frankly, we just didn't have the capacity.
Is that that's Highway 50? Is that Highway 50 and 27 or the Citrus Tower?
It's
Yeah.
Highway 50 and 27, and then the boundary around it is Citrus Tower Boulevard, that kind of
Yeah.
curves.
Okay.
So I was
And-
just trying to think of the density of the population. You have a lot, that's like half and half. There's a lot, that's where like the Home Depots.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. You've got
There's a lot
less
there's a lot
folks
of
in that
commercial.
area. Sure.
Compared to Mineola, for some reason, we're all residential, so our density is
Yeah.
really tight. But
It does pick up the, like, Sky Valley
Right.
and that kind of area. So there is, I mean, there's about 200 students in that area. So there's actually a surprising number. Transportation-wise, they actually, Pitt Street goes straight across and goes underneath 27. And so that, that actually becomes kind of the primary artery to get to Aurelia Cole.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question too that I had on the previous slide? And when we were talking about Astatula, all of the Astatula students are zoned for Tavares Middle School and Tavares High School, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, because that northern boundary line that was East Ridge was basically Lake Minneola High's
Okay.
boundary.
Thank you.
Okay, so basically where those two options bring us is, option 9 does relieve Aurelia Cole a little bit. These numbers are always going to be a little bit off because we're talking about enrollment and then district zone students. So, so you kind of have to take that into account as you go through it. Option 9 relieves Aurelia Cole a little bit. Otherwise, it leaves Mineola K-8 a little bit lower and allows for some of that additional growth, right? So, so it leaves K-8 FF at about 64%, whereas 9B relieves Aurelia Cole a little more, but leaves a higher population in K-8 FF. That makes sense.
And Kelly, building off of that real quick to Mayor Kelly's handout here, which is very helpful. So you're saying that the big X is like 800 some odd homes,
Yeah, that was Founder's Ridge, and they just approved 2 more apartment complexes
Okay.
going in there.
and then 3, 4, and 5, they're right along 27, it's the workforce housing.
And that is going gangbusters.
Yeah.
This, I mean, the X, they're not even having a final. I'm just saying, just giving you, that's
Sure.
more, you're looking like more 8 or 9 years down the road. Workforce housing is going through approval processes now with the statutes, it's going up.
Yeah.
So but you have to think of that, so
Yeah.
basically it's just a switch.
So to your point, we're having still exponential growth east of 27 in this area, so having more room in option 9 built in for Mineola FF
Right.
is probably a wise idea if we can do it.
Right, yes.
Got it, just trying to.
We could
follow.
definitely do it.
Seems like
We actually
Y'all
want to do it.
Yeah, I will say that is a very high-growth area, very high growth. So, and, the mayor's map doesn't even capture all of the
Sure.
potential
And there's
growth in
others
that.
there's other growth that's being discussed. I'm just here to talk about what has
Right.
been approved,
Well, and of the Hills of Mineola, we are only right now looking at the students who have actually shown up. So there's a lot of still houses being built in
It's-
that development.
It's kind of an amazing piece since,
Yeah.
if you've been out there recently, I did recommend with Advent going vertical.
They are
And
fast,
Crooked
yeah.
Can is coming in the next 2 months, so that's 40,000 square feet. And then a complete shopping district, it's definitely, we don't do a lot of marketing, and they're turning people away right now. So the houses are closing very quickly. We're still seeing growth there.
It's affecting my commute to work every day.
So one thing I can't help but notice on this chart, looking at the percentages, is that even despite doing this, Grassy Lake will still be at over 100%.
Yes.
And ACA is basically at 100%.
Yes.
And so, obviously, FF will not be at 100%, but we have all this development coming. When do we expect ACA, or the FF to be at 100%? Like, how many years will this buy us?
Probably fairly quickly after construction. I mean, I think it's going to be a little bit. It depends a lot on the timing of development and how quickly everything comes in. And of course, it takes a year to build a subdivision, build houses in it. But I would say, we are always looking down the road, but we're going to be kind of in this situation again. You guys get tired of my bad news.
So I'm going to guess after we even open this school, we're still not taking the portables all off Grassy Lake's campus.
Probably not
Some.
all of them. I mean,
But like-
definitely the ones, so we own the 5 where
Right,
actually
right.
you used to teach
Yeah.
up there in the front, so those will remain. And then, we'll have to look at the numbers of which ones we keep in the back. I do think we can send at least, hopefully, some of them back and
So is there
give them
some
some
point
play
where we-
space again.
okay. So knowing that school is still going to be at 100%, it's never going to drop below 100%. I can never see that. So is there some point where we talk about adding a wing there? when we can, because I think the wing is supposed to go where the 5 original portables are, right?
Yes.
So I guess maybe in all this, once you clear out some kids from portables, you can vacate those 5 portables, put the wing there in the moment where you don't have the students.
We could if we can
If-
afford it.
Right. I know it's just money.
Yeah, it's just money.
But
So, yeah, I
Just
mean,
trying
I
to
think
think,
that's
you know-
definitely something that we need to be looking at, and especially once we kind of see what those numbers do there. Then, yeah, I mean, that is, I think, definitely the best use of our money at that school, and the best use of that
we can't
property.
afford to build another school over here for some time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Grassy Lake's still gonna be 100%, like, we still have kids basically out in tents.
Yeah.
You know, so, okay. Something to
Not
consider.
intense, they're in very good
Whatever.
relocatable buildings. We don't have any students in tents.
I mean, you're moving like 400 kids, so.
But Mr. Dodd, just to clarify, I know you're not building, but y'all do own, in between the 1, 2, and 3 and the X, halfway in between there, y'all do own property there. So
We
if there,
still-
if
yeah.
there ever is a need
Right,
for a
right.
school, you don't run into the same problems that you have down in Wellness Way where you're trying to find land. Y'all do have land there. Hopefully, you'll never have to use it, but you have land.
How many acres do we have there?
We have 35 acres.
Okay,
That we carved out when we sold the
Yeah.
property.
sure, okay. So you got room for another K-8
Yeah,
eventually when you need
that
it?
was kind of the thought process there, is that,
Or,
you know, a K-8 or eventually a middle school.
sure.
Yeah.
But we're at least talking a decade or 2 before we would want to build
Hopefully.
on that anyway. so-
And then we've also secured north of that, with
At
the
Sugarloaf.
Sugarloaf, we've actually secured another school site for you there. So Mineola has been very proactive in making sure that
Thank
there
you,
were
Mineola.
schools.
Yes.
They
We
have
just
been-
can't fund them. But you do have those, because I do notice over the years, the hardest part is the developers don't want to give the land out, so we've definitely made sure that you got the land. Then
We-
for y'all to build it, that's y'all's responsibility, but we can do our part.
We appreciate that. So, you know, just, this is our option progression. We look at our guiding principles and, you know, it, again, 9 kind of has gotten most of the checks. And then, you know, 9B is certainly an option. So some of the other things we always talk about as we go through.
Can you go back to the previous slide for 1
Sure,
second?
of course.
Okay, thank you.
That was it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So some of the things we always talk about, grandfathering, in this case, because we're going to a K-8, again, there's categories of students to grandfather. Generally, what we have done in the past, and of course, board decision, but if fifth grader is moving from an elementary to an elementary, generally, we don't want to disrupt that student too much, so we have in the past grandfathered them. If a fifth grader is moving from an elementary to a K-8, we feel like that student is, you know, that's going to be their 6th grade school, and so the sooner that they get in there and familiarize themselves with that school, the better off they do. So we generally propose not to grandfather those students. And then 8th graders, you know, obviously, we want to go ahead and board decision, but look at grandfathering them. We had not, in the past situation, we had not provided sibling preference for grandfathered students. Again, K-8 transportation policy, courtesy busing between 1 and 2 miles, and for all students, K through 8. And then, of course, our hazardous walking areas when, you know, we've determined that they exist. So here's our process, generally. What we'd like to do is have the superintendent make a recommendation for moving forward with one or more options for public input. That would be at the April 22nd meeting, your next meeting. We have already started our public outreach process. Our redistricting website is up. I don't need to double check that because we have changed the,
Yes, it should be.
the website is up, but I'm not sure about that address. So we need to double check our website address, but that website is up. It is available. People have been going to it through Facebook already. And then, once we know which options, we will definitely target those parents who are affected with information about the process and make sure that they are aware of it. Social media, we've already gone out. We have an email address that is set up specifically for this process and a voicemail, a phone number in our office. We've already started getting emails to the redistricting email address. And we have public meetings. This is a little bit outdated. We actually have a public meeting set up at Grassy Lake Elementary School and one at East Ridge Middle School. Those are both in May. So we'll have that information out and send out invitations as well.
Residents have already reached out about, so the residents are aware, the ones at Grassy Lake in my city, so that was good, because we don't have parking at the city hall, but,
Yeah.
yeah, so.
Well, and I will say the city was very nice to offer us City Hall for a meeting, and then we realized it's just much easier when we can connect to the district network. And so that's why we've decided to go with Grassy Lake and parking.
Parking.
Yeah. Okay, so next couple of things, we have the meeting on April 22nd, public input meetings in May. I believe, Helen, do you have the exact dates?
Yes, May 20th is East Ridge Middle, and May 28th will be Grassy Lake.
And those would be run the same way we did the last ones, an open house format. You can come in, watch the video, and then have an opportunity to meet one-on-one, put in written public comment cards. We can look people up, see how they're affected, and hear about their concerns individually as
Can you
they
s-
move forward.
Can you say those dates again one more time?
May 20th will be East Ridge Middle, 5:30 to 7:30, and May 28th will be Grassy Lake Elementary, same time, 5:30 to 7:30. And the website is up and working.
I know, I'm more worried about the address for the website, because we changed to Google Sites, and so when you go in, then I'm not sure that
I got a text.
redistricting works. And so then, once we come back, we get public input, we would come back to you, let you know what the results of all that public input were, let you know, if we feel like there are any changes that we would want to make, in which case we go through the process again. If we feel like we're comfortable with the option, we'd come back to you, have a follow-up workshop, and then go through the actual adoption process. So tentatively, that is set to start in June, but that all just depends on how our public input goes.
So the intent is to keep the two options intact, or can we just get to one and then discuss?
That is up to the board. So, if you want to take one forward for public input, that's fine. If you want to take them both forward, we can handle that as well.
Since I have been through this before, I would suggest we take the lead on one, and then if we need to pivot or adjust, that's what we do.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, and is the consensus 9?
9 for me.
It's 9 for me.
Just to give you a little history, also in the neighborhood, because you don't show the numbers, Mineola Charter is part of this play. They have a bus that goes to the neighborhood, and there's a large part of people here that go to Mineola Charter in this neighborhood, so leaving it, that's still an option, and I'm sure the principal there is not playing changing. They do have people that are very committed. My daughter has a child, and my daughter wants to send her child to, it's done out going and sending to Mineola Charter, so they have a large following, so don't overthink it, because these people have a lot of options that they don't even care about, because they're staying where they're at. They're very happy.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like we have direction.
Well, we didn't hear from Tyler.
I'm sorry.
I'm just going to throw it out there. Maybe I'm naive, but why wouldn't we want to put them both forward for public input, and then as they come back,
Okay, you're right. We
make a
won't hear from
decision
you.
from there? I'm just saying, please correct me while I'm wrong. I'm just
Some of
curious.
us are having a little PTSD over here.
I get it.
about The, Mineola conflict and,
It just says in
You know,
big bold letters, public
I
input
think that-
only, so.
I think that we show enough leadership, and in this case, that we're able, based on everything that's before us, to make a decision,
Okay.
and then let them come back with, if there's changes that we need to make. I think that that's the kind of leadership we show.
And, go ahead.
I think, I mean, the moment you throw out this possibility to this neighborhood of, hey, we're considering moving you, I think that raises a new level of, contention of
Potentially could.
50%. You want to go one place, 50% the other. Okay, now what do you do? Whereas I think the numbers work without moving them. You get less disruption, right? Because we've talked about how many times these people have been shuffled around. I mean, it's probably the least disruptive thing for them already.
And I think you avoid the perception that we're just doing public input for the sake of public input, with our minds already made up, particularly around the discussion we've had today. And so this is the preferred. And then I think that we did say very openly that if we need to go back to the drawing board based on the public input, that we are open to that.
Okay.
You all have some very valid points, but I have a concern. What about those people who say we had no choice? You didn't offer us anything other than the one option. And I do have a little bit of Mineola history. I actually was there when Cypress Ridge was organized. So I do understand the complexity of the community. And I know those people like choices. So I guess that's my concern, that we're coming forth and saying, here's the option.
Well, I think also
And I'm just looking for an answer. I'm not saying that's the
I'm also
way.
trying to think down the road. I got a little anxiety there as we're talking about how many developments are going in. We're going to need that space in FF, particularly when Grassy Lake is already well over 100% before we even when we open the school. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, why put more students to FF when we know we need that capacity?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly prefer 9 to 9B, and you're making a lot of good points that help me understand why you're coming to that, but that's why I'm just looking at for public input, why wouldn't we do both? But yeah, I prefer 9.
But I think the public input would be that here is 9, and then if you have a concern,
Yeah.
we're still going to listen to it.
Sure.
But rather than going here, and I've got the PTSD.
Well, again, the mayor said this one's gone way smoother than the last one, so I think we've got better choices than maybe we had before, but
You'd have to live.
just want to be mindful.
You'd have to live in
You would.
Iraq for it to not have gone, for it to have been worse. No.
I like smooth, so
I don't-
I have no
I don't-
problem with
Yeah.
supporting that.
Again, the logic's there, the rationale's there, presenting one option, and then if anyone has to speak to it, rather than going, here's this one or this one, and then just like in the broken household that you have.
Yes.
This way, we're saying, here it is, and then, but no one's really that keen, so we'll go along with the leadership of the board and go with 9.
Now, depending on what grade these students are in, living in that neighborhood, they might have a choice option to go to FF, right? If they're not a kindergartner, they're not going to be there for 8 years. But if they're a 5th or 6th grader, we might have space available for 3, maybe 2, couple years.
So I have to tell you, I thought about that on my way to work this morning, and I am very conflicted. I mean, at both Lake Point and Aurelia Cole, we opened up choice spaces, and I think we have struggled with the results of that choice. You know, both of them, the second year, we've said, nope, no more choice, because, they immediately went higher than I think we predicted. I know other districts, they basically say you open up a new school, you don't allow choice for 2 years. And I totally understand that, that choice.
I guess it, because you're obligated to allow them to matriculate to the highest grade level offered at that school. So obviously, I mean, it's a smaller population than you think that would even be eligible.
Yeah,
Trying to think
I
long
mean,
term.
That's certainly a discussion we can keep
Yeah.
having.
Right.
And
it's one we can't really make today, right?
It-
We need
it's
to
one
know
we
what
can't-
kind of
yes.
developments are opening in the next few years before the school is constructed. And
I
at
mean,
the time,
and that's part of the thing, is we're working with today's numbers.
That's right.
And, another year, those numbers are going to be higher.
right. Now it's
So, I would say, I think we probably need to look at that when we actually do choice, and look at what those numbers are. I mean, I I always hate to not be able to give a parent that option right off the bat, but, or at least that hope. But I do think that's something that on the last two experiences has really concerned me.
To your point, Mr. Dodd, and this is just something that I didn't realize till I went back and researched it. When you look at the hills of Mineola, there's a line right next to where the school is. The lower part of that, I guess, between the new school site and, which is now, the houses are coming up and coming out of the ground and being built, those kids are actually zoned for Grassy Lake, which is kind of weird, if you look at it. But they'll switch, so you're gonna have this one group of kids that go to Grassy Lake. New homes, they've opened in the last couple of months. When y'all zoned, there was nothing there. But all of a sudden, so it's coming in faster, and if you look at that development, again, when you look at this, you just have to drive through the hills and see that the infrastructure's in, the roads are in, they're coming compared to when you look at some of the areas down in Wellness Way where it's just a big field. I mean, this stuff is real. I mean, I'm telling you what's been platted, what's going vertical, not the, oh, well, we've got X amount. We can't even talk about what's up in Sugarloaf Mountain, but this is real, and we are probably the densest part of it. The good thing about Mineola is when you make these decisions, realistically, there's not a bad choice for any of the schools. All the schools there are good. So you don't have that.
That
well,
is
this-
the upside.
Yeah, I agree.
There's not a bad choice. It's kind of like going to the Cheesecake Factory. Everything on the menu looks good. You just got to, you have your preference, but they're all good.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Thank you.
If not, we'd like to thank you, sir, for taking your time
thank
and
you for
sharing your
listening. Thanks so much.
expertise. And Ms. Randall, as always, thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll work with the superintendent to get a recommendation on the 22nd.
Thank you,
and then we'll
ma'am.
move forward. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Helen, thank you. Appreciate it.
I would like to say something about Helen while she's in the room. There was a situation maybe a month ago where there was a zoning and planning committee meeting, and I could not go, and this very nice lady went there and actually spoke. And I want to tell you, the attorney for the subdivision, the project, spoke of you last month and was very complimentary of your knowledge and your willingness to be there. So I certainly do appreciate that. Thank you. So now we're on 3.01, Facilities Use Policy. And we have our Director of Risk Management, and we're ready, sir.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Board. Thanks, Superintendent, everybody else for being here. This is one of my many hats I wear. I get to run all the facility rentals for the district. A few years ago, you can go to the, I got the clicker here. So we'll just jump right in. Current fee schedule has not been updated since 2008. The policy had a revision, although it was just a revision in name only when the Neola policies went into effect. Not much changed in the language except to include Facilitron. Facilitron was brought in so we could assess what our costs are to operate buildings, to staff them, to set up the HVACs to run, things like that. And we implemented it March of 2020, which immediately closed everything and made our data garbage because we couldn't rent the schools. And then when we could, we had to add extra cleaning fees because we had huge custodial costs to maintain the cleanliness and all that for the corona protocols. So we finally have good data. It's taken a while. The last fiscal year, we were able to really nail down, all right, what's our frequency of use? What are we cost? What are our costs, and what are we getting paid back in those costs? So that's where we're at. So, sorry, the printout doesn't show this well, but what we did, and actually, it's interesting. Lauren, my predecessor, did a rate comparison to our neighbors in 2019. Some of those numbers have not changed at all. Volusia and Seminole's numbers are still the same, so presumably theirs have not been updated either. You can see, let's see, Osceola has the most recent numbers. And these are directly from their websites. I pulled them out of their policies. So this is what they're advertising they charge. Just like us, currently they have a separate custodial fee, which from the history I've gathered, was kind of a hodgepodge number. It's not, I'm paying a custodian $38 or $44. It's, this is what it costs to operate the building. It's some depreciations worked into it and some other numbers that were kind of just mashed together when theoretically they all could have been one number, which is what we propose in a minute. But so you look at that as a separate number. You have your room cost, then you have your custodial cost. The highlighted blue line is the average of our neighbors' costs, and again, that's including some outliers that are old as well. And then the bottom line is difference from average. So I'll read it across for you. Difference from average left to right. Our numbers are the average 20.98, 29.18, 46.20, 88.67. This is the big one, 143.26, 80.79. Athletics, we don't really have a difference between with or without lights, but you have the number there, 106.04, 61.74. Cafeterias, 10.25, 45.49, 40.47. We don't have pools, and then the custodial is a $8.71 dollar difference. You mean repeat any of those numbers?
First one, please.
The first two, 20.98 and 29.18.
Is that like per hour?
Yes, all these rates are per hour. And in our current policy, custodial, so you have a frame of reference, we have a minimum 2-hour requirement. So if somebody's going to be there, they're going to get paid for 2 hours, and we're going to charge for the 2-hour custodial cost.
Do you have a printout that shows how often these categoricals are actually used?
I can pull all that data from Facilitron, but just so you have a kind of a concept, every day, every school has something in there being rented, and some schools have more than one thing being rented, to include the weekends. So it's a lot. And I'll have a roll-up of the totals at the end, so you see all that.
I'd enjoy seeing that.
Yeah. So, next slide. All right, so here's my recommended rates. So you can understand where these numbers come from. We have an actual operating cost that I was factoring in, which again, it was hard to break this out into readable data, so it's kind of progression here. The numbers I'm proposing include the custodial fees and all these other ancillary costs that are hard to quantify in just one number, so nobody has to be confused. They're paying this per hour period. The other things that I was able to factor in there, so, and we'll talk more about this, there's a new statute update, I think is HB 1544 maybe, the number is later, which bill it was. But it added requirements for security for our buildings. We have to maintain the single point of entry level of security if students are on campus, period, regardless of time of day. But previously, it was just during school operating time, and so anything after that, we had to have somebody on campus for our insurance requirement for monitoring the situation, making sure things are okay. But now we also have to have another person that can monitor the single point of entry, whether that's opening one specific door or making sure people are guided to the area they're renting. Can't just have people wandering the campus now, because that requirement makes us hold those security standards. So that adds, basically doubles the cost of the individual that's going to be on campus. Instead of one, now we have to have two. As you go across, the highest jump is in the athletic stadiums. I got rid of the with or without lights completely, just to make it simple. If you're there after dark, the lights are going to come on. It will average out the cost. You know, some people will use lights, some people won't. It'll average over time. There's been a lot of concerns with the game fields. So they take a pounding. They're very expensive to maintain. And the basketball courts aren't immune to this either. So when we're only charging, $20, and we have a real cost of $163, and that's not including staff time, we're really getting hurt there. So $243 was my number I put together. Realistically, it's not going to cover the millions of dollars that we end up doing in repair costs, because it was hard to calculate that into somebody's hourly cost, and they're not using it the whole time. So it'd be unfair to expect the community member to pay for all the cost. But that would get us closer to our actual operating costs. If we don't include the game fields and we only offer practice fields, or if we have small gyms, things like that, different schools have different facilities, we could reduce that rate. It would still be higher, so we can include our utility costs and things like that, but it wouldn't have to factor in for the future repairs to the game fields. And then, if you notice, there's a community rate and a commercial rate, so obviously our community members that want to host things that have a great benefit to the students, we're going to try to give them as much of a break as we can without incurring cost to ourselves. And then the commercial rate, and we have a lot of commercial renters that run different kinds of businesses, mostly like athletic type businesses out of the schools. And so if they're going to be basically using us as a storefront, obviously we can give a little more to try to offset our cost overall. So that's why those rates are higher. So these are other issues.
Which category does church services fall in?
They would be the community. So there's, obviously we have a policy, 7510. There's lots of issues here, and I'll get to my recommendations in a minute, but these are kind of a short list of things that are going on. So we allow outside agencies to offer non-monetary contributions instead of payment. So we have, it's called a joint use of facilities form. Some kind of in-kind donation to the school that the principal has a value, they can agree to that agreement. It comes to me for review to make sure it's reasonable, and then we offset whatever rental costs by whatever they're offering. So some examples could be scholarships for students for anything, going to a Solar Bears game, I don't know. There's a lot of that. We have donations of labor time for instruction of different extracurricular classes, and then straight up donations of equipment or improvements to the facility of significant value. So we just had one the other day they replaced all the wrestling mats. So they can give me an invoice and say it cost me $3,000. Okay, I reduced the cost by $3,000. Unfortunately, there's no standard of what is or isn't acceptable or of how much somebody's labor time especially is valued at. So there's times where we'll have a very high cost of rental and the offered in-kind contribution is, I'll be there to open the gate so you don't have to send a custodian so you can reduce my cost. And that to the tune of $100,000 in one particular case. So as we have these expensive improvements, there's no protection to prevent damage or overuse of facilities. I always have to talk with Mr. Carr about how we can't have a downtime for the field because we have to offer it currently by the policy. And obviously, if you don't have downtime on grass, it just gets destroyed. So that's where your cost comes in. Activities commonly associated with athletics cause higher liability. So obviously, we have protections for our students. We bought the student accident insurance, and there's other products available for like football and things that we offer. When we have incidents where there's an extracurricular league, it's a travel league, but it's on our property, but it's not being run through facility use, we incur huge liabilities, and that happens sometimes from lack of knowledge or training. And so that is a huge risk that comes about a lot. We have principals that are just flat asking to take them off the schedule. Hey, can you just not allow them to rent my auditorium, not allow them to rent my fields because they're getting pounded or we need them. And school always has precedence, but you know, I can't tell them, no, you can't rent that out because that's what the policy requires. We rent the facilities. So our recommendation is the facility rentals be limited to practice fields, gymnasiums, and other similar outdoor areas for sports. And then here's the reference, HB 1473 is the enhanced security requirement. Mr. Mabry and I are still working through how we comply with the law and make the minimum burden to either the renter and obviously our staff, because somebody's there on a Saturday, now we got to find two people, and it makes it harder to accommodate the request for rental. So we're still working through what those logistics look like, but just know that that's why these numbers are factored the way they are. So getting to specific recommendations, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot about, here's your roll-up. So on the far right, those are actual costs. So, and the how much we charged versus how much we spent. And that's assuming we received every single dollar that was charged, and we have not. Between in-kind contribution and some issues with knowing if somebody's there. We cancel a reservation because they didn't pay, but they still go because either they didn't know they weren't allowed to go or they just did it anyway. So we have problems with that. So that first line is 667,000 in operating cost that was inverted. We have 202,000 of in-kind contributions that I, subjectively said were questionable, and we had a lot more than that, probably almost $500,000 in in-kind contribution, but some were verifiable, right? You give me an invoice for this amount of labor, this amount of material you've improved. USIS is a good example. The USIS Baseball Academy, they put $100 and some odd thousand in lighting and its field improvements and things like that, and they could show me the invoice. It's like, okay, that's real. The other 202,000 were subjective. So you total that up, it's 870,000. We could potentially have a cost avoidance by updating the fee schedule, by updating the policy. On the policy side, I've really dug through this. The joint use of facility agreements, if we put some standardized language in there and some requirements of, let's say, we only do a 6-month short-term use. Anything above that requires a lease. So we have 2 good agreements right now. Claremont Knights is one. They built a field at East Ridge Middle. They put the play surface in, they put the lighting in, they put the ADA access. They spend all the money to build that structure. And so because they spent so much money, we put a lease that gives them first right of refusal after the school for utilization. USIS Baseball is the other. They put a ton of money in, so they have basically first dibs on using it after the school. So what I recommend is if someone's going to continue to use a particular facility, auditorium, et cetera, and they go beyond that 6 months of usage, then they need to enter into a more standard agreement where we can put terms and set limits and review and things like that. Right now, it's just if people want to use it and give us something, they can go. The other piece of that is standardizing the labor cost. So if you're saying you're giving me a custodial services, you're going to clean up, sweep the stage and take the trash out and clean up the whole thing so that our custodial workers don't have to deal with it on Monday, then it's going to be at $15 an hour. Like, we'll use our pay scale to standardize those costs, and what they're offsetting, if that makes sense. So those are my basic recommendations, and obviously I'm open to any other comments or ideas.
Discussion?
I'll lead out with the sports part. So our grass has to rest, and we are wearing it out, and we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on maintenance and repair. That what if we, and in every case, organizations have found, or we help them to find, an alternative. I really like the idea of the practice fields. I like that part. But they've got to get off our fields, our primary fields.
Well, and the big challenge isn't even necessarily the outside groups, but how many other sports teams we have using fields. So East Ridge football field, for instance, used by the soccer team, used by the lacrosse team. It is tearing up that field, and just talking about usage in-house.
That's what I'm saying.
Just in-house. So we're not even talking these outside groups. They're just our own sports teams.
So can we take that out of play?
That's as simple as me going in the system and taking them off the table.
I actually thought we kind of already did that, but I guess we didn't. Because when I look at all these losses, these are primarily all in the fields. If you start with baseball, I was just adding them up and go down to the softball, from the baseball to softball, where's the football? It's in there. That's over half of your grand total down here.
Yeah, basically the rest of it is mainly made up in the auditorium, like the rooms that have a lot of technology that has to be maintained, things like that.
So,
Have we ever given any thought to converting some of those fields to artificial turf?
That'd be a question for Mr. Carr, I'm not sure.
He's got a lot of comments on that.
Well, I know entire districts have done that, or districts have converted all of their fields to artificial turf. Because I'm thinking, okay, yes, we get these outside groups off, but we still don't solve the lacrosse team tearing up the field. We still don't solve track and field throwing these giant heavy balls, making dirt pits in the field. Like, where you go kick an extra point right now, and you're sitting in a dirt pit. It shouldn't look like that for how much we're paying on these fields. And so, I don't know.
I think we ought to look at that, but I think we ought to first stop.
Yeah, no, this is step one.
This is step one.
Step one.
So, and the auditorium, is that primarily churches using that?
For the most part, yes.
And, but this is gonna be my thought real quick, and then I'm gonna hand it over to you guys. These facilities belong to our people. They belong to the public. I think that, that with the big jumps, the fact that we didn't address this, since 2008, these huge jumps are gonna hurt those, groups. And I'm concerned about that. And I don't know if, you gotta stop losing money. I really appreciate the effort, but, I don't know.
No, that was honestly the first thing that stood out to me was, what's the sticker shock gonna look like when you raise the rate, more than double or triple, and if they're gonna be able to sustain that. So, are there some steps to gradually get there over time?
So this is that. If I had actually put the numbers that would make us whole, it would have been much higher.
So, I think more than half of the schools in my district are used by churches on Sundays. And some of the concerns I hear is that they're paying for custodial, but a custodian's never there. They are unlocking and locking up the school on their own. They're confused as to what they're paying for if people don't show up for any of that. That there's a custodial charge, they say, that they pay, even though they're the ones who take out the trash and sweep up the floors when they're done.
So there's two pieces to that. First, by our property insurance policy, we have to have someone there that's a staff member, has a key. They must be employed by us in some capacity. So there's been times where someone, and there's one particular instance where someone was a substitute teacher. So they're still employed by us. They're still covered on our insurances. So it keeps us covered in the event that something crazy happens while we're not there, right? Because someone's there with eyes on what's going on, theoretically.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm following here. So somebody who just happens to go to that church also happens to work for the school district.
That's how that.
And because they're there, going to this church as our employee, then, okay.
It's the requirement, that I
Then it
think we're doing.
makes the requirement of that.
That is what we're supposed to be doing, yes.
But you're going from $30 an hour to 88, and then the other larger groups from $40 an hour to $143?
Yes.
People are going to have serious indigestion of those.
Would it not be indicative, and I have lots of feelings about this, so this is just one of them, about the conversation that we're having. That is right in line with the cost of living right now. And so, it is astronomical, but so is a trip to the grocery store at this point. So I can see how our costs have continued to increase when their costs have been consistent, and that it's probably it is absolutely time to address it. But there is a part of me, when you're talking about increasing the cost, and then I think about the athletic teams, that cost is just going to go right back to our parents. Do you know what I mean? So then they're going to charge more for the access to the team to be on, and that access to the team is so limited anyway. So that it is a cascade effect in lots of.
Well, and so
places.
some of these organizations charge a lot to the students already and are
Of
paying
course.
nothing to use our facilities.
Of course.
So-
Of course.
No, I think there's an answer ultimately, and they've got to pay for it, right? The school district can't be
Correct.
subsidizing a
Correct.
church to operate. I 100%, agree with that statement. I guess I'm wondering that, okay, so in these cases where the employee just happens to be at that church that day and is the key holder, we're charging them for labor of supervision, but we're actually not shelling out any money for that supervision, right?
Well, and that goes back to my statement about the custodial fee. The custodial fee, whenever it was designed, is kind of a hodgepodge fee. It's not paying for the person that's there. It's paying for all the things involved with operating alongside of the tiny little fee for the building. I think the fee for the building was made up, and they try to capture the rest in the custodial fee.
In the case of this auditorium loss, for example, I know at Leesburg High School, that church did a major investment of renovating their
They
auditorium.
continue to do so,
And
yeah.
continue.
So that's one
So
that.
are you showing that as a loss, or how?
Not that one. I kept that number out. So that particular scenario is one that I'm talking about, this joint use, that would get more codified in a written document so that we can maintain that. Right now, I'm basically in a
And we did do a
Microsoft
lease on
note.
that, didn't we?
Say again?
There is a lease with them on that.
You said they were just two pieces.
I would have to go look. I don't think they have a.
I think we have to.
I'd have to verify that.
Seems like every church would have an agreement because they're there more than 6 months.
They do 6 months, and then they do another 6 months, and they do another 6 months.
I see.
Well, and my other question would be in regards to an opposite situation that Mr. Dodd's suggesting that they're doing the work. What happens when you show up on Monday morning to school and the work hasn't been done? And who's in charge of that oversight? So we're asking principals to approve requests in Facilitron and then follow up with, are they doing the custodial work? And I'm probably sure there's other more important things to do on a Monday morning than to go down to the auditorium or the ball field to make sure that they were cleaned up properly. So I just feel like and then I also feel like we're leaving it to them. So if they go to the auditorium and it's a mess for whatever reason, then they have the obligation to call the organization and say, hey, you know what I'm saying? And then what is that taking away from our academic side of the house, where now they're having to manage property rentals, and now you didn't do what you said you were going to do, so we're going to, like, who's having that conversation?
So that is really incumbent on whoever at the school is most involved. Usually it's an AP or a principal. We do get those calls, hey, they left the place a mess. And so all I can do at our level is we put a note in the system. Basically, it makes them a problem renter, so in the future they have to go through more hoops as a renter to get in. And so far, we haven't denied anybody as a problem renter, except for people that just don't pay. We just stop letting them in. But yeah, it is a lot of work.
So do you have a lot of not paying at the current rate?
Yes.
So I have and you and I talked about, I did get a call from someone. Actually, Mr. Dodd, it's someone in your area.
Okay.
So I have a little different concern. This person had a hodgepodge of complaints, but one of the problems seemed to be that we have ever how many principals we have out there leasing out buildings or portions of buildings. We have their own interpretations as to what's allowed and what's not allowed. And this gentleman had a very, in my opinion, convoluted situation. He went everything from being an employee at the school to his wife being a substitute to him being required to do custodial work for another church. So my request would be that we somehow sit down with our principals and make sure that everyone is on the same sheet of music. That I can't rent a room at East Ridge Middle and get conditions that I wouldn't be able to get at Tavares Middle. And these are random schools. Because I think that's part of the problem. He suggested that, somebody was paying, somebody wasn't paying because they were related to the principal. I mean, there was just all kinds of accusations flying around that don't necessarily bid well for the district. So I think whatever we decide today, we do need to get a more concise, consistent process for the people who are going to be implementing. Because it sounds now like we just got, you and I agree, a whole bunch of stuff going on, and it just depends on that principal and what they're feeling on that day, and we don't have consistency with rent being collected. And by the way, who keeps that money now? Does it go back to the school or does it go to the district?
It's a split.
Okay.
So, Facilitron takes their small portion for administering the digital side, and then it's, I think it's a 50/50.
Yeah, okay. And see, again, I remember my principal days. That might be something that we need to look at too. Because when the school gets that money, if the field is destroyed, they're not putting that back into fixing the field. They're calling Mr. Carr.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, all of those things, I think, are things we need to really look at.
And-
I understand why the school gets a portion, but is that appropriate now? We've been doing that for 40 years.
I'd also like to bring out, so there's a couple, like I said, this is a really convoluted discussion, but thinking about access that some of our coaches use the facilities. Our coaches don't make additional money in most cases. And the use of the facilities is a way that we can, it's a perk, for lack of a better word, right? For those that aren't in a place that, reimburses coaches or incentivizes coaching. And so I also worry about that as far as we don't have a ton of attractive employee benefits. And so we have some very talented coaches in this area that now we're going to make you pay $100 and whatever dollars for your use of the field when you're, do you know what I'm saying? And I'm
I
not,
can
An hour.
speak.
An hour.
I can speak directly to that. So there's two different tracks, right? There's school activity, which costs nothing. It's an internal calendar the school can schedule for anything.
that's not a school-based, though, just to
So
clarify.
that's why they have to pay.
Sure.
Because if they're drawing it onto our insurance, first, they're charging for it, which they're not allowed to do that. Second of all, now if they get an injury, it's our injury. And we've had some very serious claims because of
Mm-hmm. Sure.
those types of scenarios.
I'm sure.
And the other thing that we're seeing is in certain pockets, the coach who has a travel team will say, I'm going to take the facility for an entire year. And I'm going to go close the gates and clean it up and write whatever. You know, it's like they keep everybody else out. And we've gotten complaints from other people about, I can't rent this facility because it's all tied up
Right.
with this one travel ball team. And the relationship is the coach is also the coach for the
Correct.
team
Which means
at
a lot of the
school.
students are the students of the school. Like it is, you know what I mean? Like I
It's
just,
difficult.
it is difficult. It's
And I
very
will
well-
say too, and it's not a recommendation, but I will say that there are districts that are similar size to us that if they're really taking an approach to rent these facilities out on a consistent basis, they have like, almost like lack of better terms, a real estate person, but they have somebody that's in-house that handles a lot of the stuff, and that might handle some of the consistency issues
Yeah.
that are out there.
Didn't we have where the coach also was, in Eustis particularly, was also handling all the maintenance and stuff on the fields?
Was that Eustis baseball?
Is that baseball,
Yeah.
Eustis
Yeah,
baseball?
and that's when we do have a lease agreement with.
And so Eustis is a different, like Eustis is kind of different because that strip where all the fields are, there's other fields that aren't even used by the high school. So they've revamped one of the fields that is not a high school field, so given back to the community in some regard, and that's that they get first access, but it's our property still. So I think there's a couple of weird, like even we just purchased the Tavares fields. So there's just a couple of different,
But
Why
the
those
fact that they
leases
do the maintenance, they don't pay any use at all.
And there are some joint use agreements currently, that's what the scenario is. And there's, like I said, there's one that's $100,000 and there's one that's $85,000.
which is significant compared to some people.
And again, there's no standardization of what those actual costs are. That's just, I'm renting it for.
But they're doing it in
the
kind, though. They're working off those numbers.
Supposedly.
They rent it for the entire year. It costs $85,000 to rent it for the entire year. So their in-kind contribution of labor is $85,000.
Yeah, so we get nothing.
So in the
In
case,
some instances, yes.
in the case of the fields in Eustis, that ball field is actually an attachment to Eustis Heights campus.
Yeah,
Who
that's
gets
where
the
it's-
funding, Eustis High or Eustis Heights?
That's a
Good
finance
It's a great
question.
question.
We'll have to look and see.
Okay. Because I know the rental agreement is between Eustis Heights, or it was.
Right now, it's between Eustis High School, because usually it's the Eustis High School baseball team and the Eustis High School softball team's
Yeah.
field that they're renting, so that's where the
Yeah.
agreement goes.
But there used to be an agreement between Eustis Heights and it was like for, I don't know, 50 years?
Oh, that was the Little League field, and that's the one
Yes.
that Eustis Baseball
Yes.
Academy has basically took from a
Taken
pile of
over.
nothing and built a field out of it.
Okay.
And that was a very contentious meeting a couple of years ago. So that's the other spot we found ourselves in, is when they're not doing their job.
Yeah.
And then we sit
Correct.
down to talk about Little League services that are important to the community, and we need to be a partner, but we're not getting anything back, like nothing back, and it's
So that-
costing us money.
That's a great example, because that one, we did have a lease agreement, and because the person wasn't doing
Right.
what they were supposed to, we were able to hold them in breach of the contract. So that's why those leases are really important for those bigger agreements.
But it definitely wasn't a great meeting. Like,
No,
it
it
didn't
was
have a
not.
good feel at all. It was not,
I was
you
there.
know,
Can imagine.
yeah, it was not nice.
I do want to make one comment, Ms. Cunningham. You mentioned the standardization, so, and why a lot of the noise is coming all of a sudden is because I was trying to do that. About 2 months ago, when I got a report back from Facilitron, I realized how bad off we are, and my job is to try to stop losing money anywhere we can, hence risk management. And so I realized that at the school level, they were able to remove fees at random. So I took that ability away from the system, and so that's when all the noise started. So there's your context.
Gotcha,
That was my effort to standardize everything.
gotcha.
I didn't understand what you just said. What did you do?
The schools were able to delete fees. They can no longer do that. I'm the gatekeeper there now.
So I got a couple
I think
ones
that's
here.
a problem.
So first, I think for anybody doing athletics, I mean, they certainly need to carry their own accident insurance for their participants, for that matter right there. That's a big one that, to your point, I think we need to close up quickly.
Now, I was under the impression that people were already having to book their own liability insurance,
I
that we
was
were
too.
recommending that they go to, there was like
Like I said, we
some
found-
company,
We found a
Tulip.
pool.
right? So are they not doing that?
If they do a rental properly, that they have to get the
the ones that are
insurance,
renting.
but if they don't do a rental,
So some are not renting properly and therefore they're skirting.
They fly under the
Well, then
radar.
we're also talking straight general liability insurance versus accident insurance
Sure.
of a student that gets hurt on a field that's not our own,
Well,
to Rob's point there.
yeah, and Mr. Brandberg, you're right on the head there. So when it's an outside, you name the organization, travel ball league of whatever, it can be their liability, not our liability, and that's huge.
Yeah.
But I thought we already had that in place with this Tulip.
Some are
That's it
not
too.
renting the fields. They're just using them.
That's their home school, and they're the same kids, so just go do it.
Confused.
Does the Tulip cover the accident insurance as well?
They would have to, you can do Tulip and buy like event insurance
Sure,
is for,
yeah.
or they can purchase regular insurance through their own.
Because the
program.
way I typically understand it, Tulip is general liability for using the fields, but again, I'm gonna harp on the accident insurance
The
because
catastrophic side.
that's the biggest thing. Kid breaks his arm on our football field in a Pop Warner football game. That's not, in my mind, covered under a Tulip policy unless you're
Probably not.
buying something else. So we keep saying we make them buy insurance, we do, but not the one that matters in this case that falls back on our insurance.
But wouldn't you, and maybe we don't know the answer to this question, but my husband coaches a travel ball team that's not associated with any school in Lake County, so I'm just going to put that out there. But he has to show insurance to the tournaments. So they have insurance because they can't participate.
Correct. So in those bigger leagues, they are required to have insurance. They have to show the proof of insurance to the people that run those leagues, but they may or may not actually call to verify them.
Got it.
And we
Okay.
do.
Okay, so moving on from that.
So hold on, in
Sure.
very simple terms that I can understand.
Insurance,
What
they
you're
must buy
telling me is these people who go out and buy these 3-day policies for an event, if someone breaks their arm, they can still go after the school board insurance because it happened on our field, even though they made that purchase.
You can always make an argument. So if it was a field condition, yes, they could bring it back on us. But the more separation we can get, the harder it is to make the argument.
Accident insurance makes it very easy. General liability is generally if someone slips and falls in the audience watching this game. But if we're going to keep talking on athletics here, if a kid breaks his arm on the field, you can look at that a couple different ways, but your accident insurance policy is going to be the easiest thing to fix that arm and avoid a lawsuit or back and forth, legal fees, everything else.
That's why having a contract's so important. You
Correct.
can shift that liability.
Agreed.
Through contract language.
Through contract.
That means they have to rent the facility.
They actually have to rent the facility. They can't just like sneak in and use it.
Yeah.
Can that rental agreement be
Consistency.
tightened up, so just the rental rather than a contract? Like if it's a 3-day deal, can we just tighten it up that way?
Sure.
Well, that's what the Facilitron piece is. When they click through that, they're signing, digitally signing a short-term contract. So,
No, but we're shifting the liability that Tyler's concerned about.
Yes.
And me. That-
Yes.
Just in changing the wording.
Well, how are they using the facilities without renting them properly?
They have keys?
show up.
They just show up. Okay, but there are fences around these schools. They're not climbing over the fences.
They have a key,
They have
They have a
keys.
key. So some staff member, are we holding them accountable for
not a staff.
inappropriate use of the?
That was kind of the argument I was making about them.
I mean, right? I mean,
I think it sounds like to me that maybe in these schools, they've used it kind of as a perk to the
That was
staff.
why I mentioned what I was
Yeah,
mentioning.
that's what it sounds like to me.
Yep.
Where someone gets a key and opens it up, that's a buddy of a buddy who's letting you use whatever it is, right?
Right.
So,
All right, so moving on from athletics, let's stop talking about that for a second. To make sure I understand, on the recommended rate slide, so let's just pick on the auditorium, for example. So are you saying that the average cost to the district 22-23 to rent the auditorium was $40 an hour? Is that
That's-
fair to say, just based on these numbers?
Yes.
And then are we adding in the custodial, because we're making an inclusive rate, and is the custodial not 15 or $20 an hour, it is whatever else above it?
I used the average.
Okay.
And then with the auditorium, I also added, so right now we have the option of picking an AV tech. I took that option away. We're not going to offer that. They're going to get an AV tech because we don't want random, homeowner running our $10,000 board and breaking all the equipment.
So, and again, we'll have one-offs and leases and everything else, like, for example, Church of the Lakes at Leesburg High School, put in the AV booth, has an AV
Yeah.
tech, so in the lease, all that can be worked out.
Yeah,
The
those
one-offs
terms.
is where we'd get into this, agreed. So if we're talking $40 an hour in cost, $40 an hour in custodial or whatever else, are we trying to build in some more additional as a pot to then help take care of the rest of the stuff? Or are we saying that we're still not breaking even at the cost of $120 an hour, even to the community side?
Yeah, so when you look at, go back, the last slide here. So those operating costs include, energy usage, they include, breakdown on HVAC equipment, they include a lot of other ancillary
Sure.
costs, and they have a model, and obviously everything has assumptions in it. I didn't write the model, so I don't know what all thing they assumed in there. But using those numbers, even at the recommended number, we still fall a little short, but like I said, if I built in like future capacity so that if we didn't do this every single year,
Right.
it would have been astronomically high. So this gets us close, and I would also recommend that this gets reviewed at least every couple of years as far as the fees are concerned.
I would agree. Is the thought to then continue to split this revenue between the district and the school and everything else? We're going to look at that as well, or?
I didn't even get that far.
Okay.
We can absolutely look at that.
Yeah,
from a
I'm
financial
just trying to make sure that the money goes to where it needs to be spent to take care of these facilities. But I'm also really concerned about specifically the community rate versus the commercial rate.
I just
Making
added
sure.
20%.
I'm sorry?
I just put 20% on.
You're good. So no, I'm just saying for the sake of the community side, being mindful, again, this is these facilities are essentially owned by the community, taxpayer dollars are funding it, making sure that we're not going over and above on the community rate side versus where we could put some more even on the commercial side if need be to offset that difference. It's such a value add if we can do it the right way and have a good control over cost to continue working together there. And I just don't want us to be too far trying to say we need to recoup every dollar that we spend on facilities for outside groups, especially in the county.
Yeah, no,
Or we kinda-
the community rate, I was trying to be very conscious of that, because
Yeah.
obviously, a lot of these programs are specifically for the benefit of the students, so,
Right.
I was trying to be real close
They
on
are.
that.
It's their ad valorem that are paying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
And that's where I'd say even if it was $100 an hour versus $160 an hour for the commercial side, I mean, in my mind, I'd like to see a bigger gap there if that's what we're trying to do.
What's the example of the commercial? I'm really, like you said, somebody has a storefront in one of our schools? Like, what?
Theoretically, right, so a good example, like Taekwondo, right? You used to see a storefront Taekwondo in every other strip mall, and obviously that's a good sport, good outlet for kids, et cetera, but the tie-in's kind of weak. But you charge for that, right? You charge for the lessons, you charge for the time, you charge for the gis, et cetera. And we have entities like that operating out of our schools.
So the people that come in and operate on our campus they're earning income off of it, they're making a profit off of it. So when they're making a profit off of it, it's considered commercial, and so what he's saying is they should pay a little bit more rate to cover it.
And
If
this-
they were running in a storefront, they'd be paying
More than 20%.
thousands.
Versus our churches and communities that are, they're not there for a profit, they're there for what churches do.
does-
Get you to heaven. but-
Right.
Does state statute limit us on what we can and can't choose to rent out our facilities to? Like, because you mentioned the policy earlier that pretty much says the,
State statutes don't, but there is a provision in schools that have been funded with CFPs
Right.
that they're not supposed to like earn extra money and stuff like that. So you have to be careful. There's a fine line. You don't want to profit off of that.
Sure.
Because they,
Well,
because
I
you're
just
using.
think
Yeah, I
if
don't think we're profiting there.
well, certainly. But I don't think if we're talking about maybe potentially saying that no one can rent our grass facilities because of all the damage that's done to them already, if we can do that, can we also look at how and when we can rent these facilities? Because kind of where three of my other fellow board members were very concerned about the public input of having two options there. I don't know if this is really worth in the grand scheme of things to say that we're going to make up our money here at the detriment of the people that use our facilities for common things. Can we say that we can't have Taekwondo come in on the weekends or whatever else and limit it to things that we deem appropriate? Try to make up what we can, but not try to get it all back here. I just think we're causing more harm than what it's worth, even for $670,000 in the grand scheme of things. It's something to think about.
Well, and to your point, we already have that ability in the current written policy. It says in the best interest of the district and demonstrable benefit to the Greater Lake County community. So some of these entities, I argue, are not in the best interest or demonstrably, beneficial to the community. But to keep things consistent, I've never said no to anybody.
Sure.
Unless, it's something insane that's illegal or
And
can't do it.
understandably so. Yeah.
So I would need some kind of guidance on what we call our minimum threshold, right? Is Taekwondo out, or is it, extra Spanish language is, instruction for $200 an hour? Where do we draw a line? I haven't drawn a line because I don't know where to draw it.
You could
If
draw it
a
on
group-
tax.
That's a good example. So if a group came in my mind, and they were teaching English to Spanish people, that's good for the community.
Yep, sure.
So I'm really torn between, those are their buildings, and then I have a hard time process, like the gym and all that kind of business. First of all, I think we don't have extra law enforcement because we don't rent during school hours, period. End of the story, right? Is that possible?
We don't rent during the school day, no.
Correct. No, but you were saying we had to have extra law enforcement.
So
if
that's-
we did.
Well,
And I'm
if there's a
saying we do
student,
not.
not if there's a student on campus.
So 1473.
So if we have somebody come in after school closes, but students are still on campus, and we have people come in and rent the facility, we're going to have to provide
And these aren't
additional
the same
security.
students that are participating in the program that he's offering.
Well, see, that's just it. It's hard to draw a line between, there are kids on our campus, and instead of going home, or they may go home, come back, either way, but there's going to be a hard way to draw a line between, that's our student, that's not our student. It's after hours. In the past, it was like, okay, well, after hours, the state kind of said, well, once you get past your normal day, then your liability is no longer there for having someone on campus. But now they've come back and they've said, and as long as you've got kids on campus, then you have to have security.
And we kind of walk through the brain game of when would that apply, and at high school, there's kids there every day of the week, Saturdays working on sets for a play, or Sunday, collecting donations, whatever it is, so we would be held to that standard basically every day at a high school, and potentially at a middle school as well.
I think Mr. Cole has a comment we need to hear.
Well, I was just going to say, one way to make a distinction is between tax-exempt entities and taxable entities. Most, what I would consider community organizations are tax-exempt, they're 501c3s, and it's perfectly appropriate to have special treatment based upon that status. And for-profit entities, they write this off as a business expense against their revenues, and so it's not quite as big of a burden to them to write that off. So that's just one way if you're trying to figure out, rather than get to the character of the business, look at whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit.
Right.
And how do you then separate, because what is that company, RPT, the drum ones that I had the issue with? And they're not paying anything, but they buy drum heads.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
There's one, I'm trying to go specific where I can now process. So there's a group that teaches drums at Lake Mineola High School.
Okay.
They don't pay anything. They hold their classes there. It's a what do you call it, a drum corps. And so, but they offer drum heads as part of their.
Yes, and that one we have an in-kind contribution. They sent me an invoice of what the drum heads cost, and that offset the cost based on.
Then how are you going to process that? So you take a drum head that's $16, and they're supposed to be renting at $80. So they have to show you an hour. So are you tracking their hours, and then you're going to subtract it, and then you owe me?
I literally, that's what I have to do right now. I take whatever they send me, and I look at the fees that are being charged in the reservation and go through and take them out.
It seems really
Yes,
complicated.
it's a lot of
So
work.
complicated.
That's back to my point of everybody having the same message, because I think you've got roughly 45, 50 people interpreting what that means.
And how much it's worth, right?
Exactly.
Well, for that specific instance, that one's easy, because they can show me an invoice, right?
But what about the baseball field where the guy said it's $85,000 and their labor's $85,000?
That's why I want to standardize the labor cost based on our what we pay.
So how about storage spaces? I don't see those on the list. Sometimes schools will give a closet to
We shouldn't
somebody.
be doing that.
Or a church might park an entire trailer on that.
That's a huge
school
liability.
property.
We shouldn't be doing that.
And so I'm kind of confused about sort of things of that nature.
As we find things like that, we handle them as best we can politically and, tactfully, but they shouldn't be doing that.
Okay.
What's wrong with the trailer on our property?
Because what's in the trailer, is it chemical storage, is it gonna catch on fire, is it gonna burn our building? I mean, all these things, you're mingling insurance liabilities, and that's a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the only fire that we've had since I've been here was the candle burners that heat up the pots when they have dinners.
That a
and
Boosters Club may or may not have stored on our campus.
That they stored in our, yeah.
So my question to you would be, this sounds like a whole lot of work. So what
Yes.
is your proposal for, I mean, I see the rate proposal, but there obviously is a little bit more that goes into this. So what are you thinking as far as next steps?
So, first of all, is I'll, draft up something to update the policy, so that you can have something to look at and digest and make comments and whatever. So, that's a good starting point. The fees have to go up to some degree, and honestly, I think that'll also be a deterrent to some of the frivolous renters that are out there. So I think that'll reduce some of the workload. I'm also going to be automating a lot of these processes that are just killing me and my assistant on time. We're in there at least 15 hours each a week dealing with just this, and this isn't even in my job description. So that'll help reduce the burden. If it continues to be this, like, down in the weeds where we're really having to work through every single one, I would come back with a recommendation for a person that does this. Other districts have a facility use manager, is
They're
what
just
they
gonna have more
do.
cost to it.
But if it's saving us money
If it's
because
saving
we're
money, it'll
sitting
pay
on
for
top of
itself,
them,
yeah.
then I think, it could be an option.
And I think we're also going to go back and look at some of our more long-term renters and come up with maybe pushing them into a regular contract, leasing contract versus, because it's kind of two things, it's kind of temporary leasing, and then we've got some long-term leases too that are acting in there. So I think looking at those that are renewing every 6 months and saying, hey, you probably want to do more of an annual agreement. And
Yeah, and I definitely would capture that in the policy, right? If you're going to be renting, a total of a year, whether it's a 6-month rent and then another 6 months or not, you're going to enter into a lease agreement.
We've certainly done that in the past. And
Yes.
I think we did it for Leesburg High School, that it was long, because they're making this huge investment, and they don't want to lose it in a year, right? So, but I know the nights that you spoke about, when they
Yes.
used to rent the field at Claremont, where Willie Cole is, that was long-term, because we had a long-term lease, because they made this investment in the infrastructure of that field. So, but I would be I'm more interested in looking at, in each of these categories, what is that, how much are you renting? And who are we renting to, kind of a profile of what that looks like.
Yeah, I can definitely I can give you the whole spreadsheet. It's very dense, but it's got every single breakout in there of, what it costs by what room, et cetera.
I know in the north side, where I grew up in Jacksonville, my mom was president of the North Side Preservation Society. And for the record, it's an amazing cause, because there's nothing to preserve on the north side of Jacksonville. But their group needed a place that charged just a little bit, and they finally found Highlands Elementary School on Dunn Avenue that would give them the facility for free, and that's what they could afford. So I don't want to cut groups out that legitimately need to have a civic place to meet, and we're going to say, you now owe us $60 an hour. It's just against my grain, because it's their building. That's how I feel about it.
Plus the insurance cost.
Yeah.
I'm interested more about this 1473. I read through the bill. It doesn't look to me like it's been signed into law yet, but I assume it's coming. The governor's going to sign it.
I haven't followed it that closely.
I doubt seriously that he would veto it.
Right,
School
because it
safety.
looked like it had pretty
Yeah.
good bipartisan support through both chambers. But so looking at that and reading that about, now you have to man all these gates of egress, ingress while students are present on campus, regardless of whether it's during school hours. Okay, so if I'm thinking about the security costs, let's say now you got a church opening, and maybe they've got a couple of gates. They can't use a couple of gates anymore. They got to go down to one, right? Because we're going to put somebody there. We're going to have somebody there. So that staff member who now showed up with the key, now their job is to stand there at that gate, right? the entire time. So they no longer become a participant in the church anymore, right? Because, so really, we're gonna have to send our own person out there, right? They can't delegate that to a non-employee. Is that the way I read
Yeah,
it?
they wouldn't be able to because it'd be huge liability.
And that's if students are present. So some people would make the argument, and maybe on the high school, maybe it's more challenging, because maybe on a Sunday morning, you might have some sanctioned high school activity there. But in an elementary school on a Sunday morning, probably not.
Probably not in elementary.
They don't have an
But they're gonna-
auditorium either.
What's that?
They don't have an auditorium either, the elementary.
And we
Or
would be able,
K-8.
we'd be able to adjust in the system, like if we decide elementary, we're not gonna have to worry about Saturday, Sunday, we could adjust it on the weekends for that specific group.
Or they'd be using the cafeteria, but they're still paying that security cost.
But you may have law enforcement as a member of that church, just like you have as the person opens the door, the keys.
But Mark, Mr. Dahl was saying they have to stand out front now.
Somebody's gotta man that gate.
Yeah, it's controlling the single point of entry, it's not necessarily the fact that it's a person with a gun
Out the
necessarily.
gate, you start service and go inside.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't require like a Saturday, Sunday thing. It wouldn't require an armed guardian or law enforcement. It just requires a staff member at the gate. So it could
Controlling
be,
access.
yeah.
But that's when students are
It's
present.
control access.
So if students are there as part of the church, does that count as students are present?
If they're there on their, as a non-student, because they're participating as an outside organization, they're not a student, so they wouldn't count under that statute.
So in many of those circumstances, these people are, we don't have to provide any sort of security for them. They don't need to man the gate because they're not at a time when students are present, but that security cost is built into their rental fee.
Where our concern is when you get to the high schools that have, I mean, they have a mix. They have facility rentals going on, but they also have other student activities going on at the same time. We don't see that much of a problem in an elementary school. Maybe not as much of a problem in a K-8 or even in a middle school, but high schools seem to be open.
If you're gonna meet in a
all
high
the
school
time.
cafeteria, you're gonna have to pay the security cost on a Sunday morning.
Which is the only place that's a big enough facility to.
I'm not quite sure about Sundays, but I know, because I live right close to Mineola High, and I drive by there all the time, and Saturdays they're always doing some kind of testing or something going on, so they,
Painting parking squares or
yeah,
whatever.
Is there a minimum number of hours to rent one of our facilities?
No,
theoretically rent for
one
an
hour, at the current fees, the only thing that's like a minimum is the custodial's a minimum cost of 2 hours.
Okay.
But 2 hours at $8 doesn't cover a custodian.
what we're saying.
Any final discussion?
Can I mention one thing? So I was just looking at the bill, which you're right, has not been signed by the governor yet, but it does make an exception to the closed-off access if you have a shared use agreement. So it appears to say you can agree otherwise in your shared use agreement, so that may be one way to handle the situation.
Just, completely unrelated, but there's a lot in 1473 from a security and safety standpoint. I'm gonna have a lot of questions outside of facility rentals, so I don't know if like the best avenue for that, when this gets signed into the law, is if we meet executively to talk about how the district is able to comply or meet all those things, or if it's just
Yeah.
like
Oh.
some of those are open topics or individual meetings with Mr. Mabry, or I don't know what that looks like, but
We
There's
all
a
have
lot.
lots of questions. It is.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually went over it with principals last week. It's going to require Mr. Mabry and his team really going out and walking sites with our law enforcement partners as well to ensure that when we think about every gate, every door, all of the things that have to be in place, it's going to take a lot of work, and we have until July 1 to comply. So we do know that the state will be doing site visits. looking-
unannounced audits. I
Yes.
think it
Yes.
mentioned.
They're looking for three things, so they've already told us. Locked doors, locked or man gates, and hard corners. Those are the three things that will be assessed in the coming year. So we are moving now to ensure that every classroom is in compliance and that every school is in compliance. So
We're going to be in pretty good shape, though.
We've got,
Well,
we've got a lot of work.
So it mandates by statute that the teacher has to have the door locked,
Yes.
whereas right now it's just like a district rule, right? So.
It was, I believe, one of the non-negotiables within the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I know, but
Yeah.
in all, anyway, this is way off topic, but I just want to throw it out there that at some point I'm going to be interested in a conversation about.
We will all be interested in that
I'm sure.
conversation. So, yeah, we have some things coming up this summer where I know that Mr. Mabry and I will both be attending some things where we hope to get some clarity around specifically how we're going to comply, but we will comply.
Of course we will. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you, gentlemen. We'll look forward to hearing more from you. Does anyone need a break? Okay. We'll take a 5 minutes?
Yeah.
5-minute break.
Freezing. Mrs. Challenger, I am freezing. Freezing. I have a blanket in my car. I'll go get it.
What are you talking about?
Holy.
All the hot air in here?
And not gonna happen. It's nice to see you again.
It's been so long.
Yeah, you going to talk to us about the preliminary capital plan?
I am. So usually, I come to you in July-ish with the draft of the capital plan for the coming year. This year, there are some struggles, so there has been some not so great news, just with the increase in construction costs and what that is doing with our capital plan. And so before I, put a lot of work, come to you in July, and then we end up on a tight timeline, I kind of wanted to run some of my thoughts by you and get preliminary feedback on, whether you feel like I'm on the right path or whether you feel like I need to make some changes to it. So that's really what I'm here about. Just overall, Carlos in finance has been really great about doing just regular health checks with me on our revenue and our expenditures. Our revenue is basically about where we thought it would be. Our expenditures, on the other hand, as you know, construction costs have basically doubled over the last 5 years. And so where we thought that we would be when we kind of went into this track of the capital plan back in 2018 is not where we are in 2024. So our sales tax projects are really the projects that I am mostly concerned about. We get a little over $20 million a year in sales tax. Aurelia Coal cost us somewhere in the $55 to $60 million range. Fruitland Park Elementary School which we thought initially would cost us around $20 million. A little over, is costing us more like $42 to $45 million. So literally everything has doubled. That is really putting a lot of stress on the sales tax projects and maintaining that funding stream, or maintaining that track for those projects. To me, it is very important that we keep up with those projects and we do what we said that we would do when we went out to the voters in 2016, right? So we renewed that sales tax for 15 years in 2018. It will come up again, hopefully right around the time I retire, in 2032. And so, we want to make sure that we have done what we told the community that we would do. We are on a second of those projects. Aurelia Coal was the first. Fruitland Park is the second. Beverly Shores is the third. We have an architect and a construction manager for that project. We have not gotten the cost estimates, but I feel like actually on this one, we've gotten a handle on what costs are, and so I feel like we actually are budgeting, hopefully, enough for that project. We have the money for Beverly Shores. After that, it all starts to, we don't have the money necessarily in hand for the next project, which is Eustis Elementary School, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then that affects the timing for the rest of the projects as we go down. So, I don't ever want to come to you just with bad news. I want to come to you with some thoughts on how we can fix that. And so one of the things back in 2018, when I sat up here and I was very, very optimistic about where we were, was we had added capital renewal projects to the capital plan. And the thought process there was that we would take those schools that were getting to be like 25 to 30 years old, and we would put money in to basically refresh them and hopefully fix some of those basic things that would get them for another 25 to 30 years. And so we had kind of put that money in. We started with Tavares Middle School and Eustis Middle School. I will say there is money sitting in, a pot of money. We did an assessment on those schools, and basically what we discovered is largely our maintenance department has, to most extent, been keeping up with them. What the assessment identified was that largely they are, basic maintenance issues that we can take care of through basic maintenance. Doesn't completely refresh the schools, but we can keep them going in pretty good shape with just a basic investment. And so my proposal would be that we take that funding and we release it back into both basic maintenance and keeping the sales tax projects moving forward. So that money was ad valorem money. It basically would then go into maintenance and sales tax projects. We have some more we had allocated funding for this year at Astatula Elementary and South Lake High School. And basically, my proposal for this coming year would be that we end the capital renewal projects. So those two schools, we would release that funding back into, again, sales tax projects and basic maintenance. There are a couple of projects that we've gotten farther along with. Groveland Elementary School, we have been working with that principal. She has some safety and security issues that I don't want to go into detail on, but we would like to go ahead and take care of those using the capital renewal funding that we have for her. We also had put money towards capital renewal of Beverly Shores and Villages, and essentially that was intended to, as we put additions at those schools, that was intended to bring the remainder of the school up to the same standard as the additions that we're putting there. So I'd like to keep those funding streams going. And then in the outer years of the project, or of the capital plan, there was money that was allocated towards capital renewal, but it was not allocated towards particular schools. And so basically, we would just end that capital renewal project process until a better time and put that money back, like I said, into the sales, keeping up the sales tax projects, keeping those on track, and beefing up the general maintenance budget in order to make up for some of what we're not going to be doing as capital renewal. So that's kind of number one that I wanted to talk to you about. So I wanted to see if there were any questions on that, what your thoughts are on that approach to this year's capital plan.
Those capital renewal projects, the funding source on that was ad valorem?
Primarily,
So
when
we
we
would-
first started, we thought we'd be able to fund them with sales tax dollars, and now obviously that's.
We could shift the ad valorem to supplement the sales tax to make sure the sales
Yes.
tax projects get done, because those are the ones we've gone out publicly to advertise and.
Exactly.
Okay.
We've advertised we were going to use those dollars and when we had the need. I don't know that we ever told the public a specific time. What we told the public was.
We did,
were gonna pay as you
actually.
go. Well, we
we
can
had-
change the time, we can change the time based on the economy and
We
what's
had
going
a
on.
priority list, right. But, so when we went out to go for the sales tax, we had a
listed.
priority list that
Correct.
basically said, here's the order that we want to do everything in. Kind of had a general thought on what the thing is. My concern, Mr. Matthias, is if we push them too far based on the funding that we do have in, we're not going to have them all done by 2032. Or even by the time, we're not going to have them in the plan and ready to go. So that when we go to ask again for a renewal of that sales tax in, say, 2030, then we'll be so far behind that it will make us look bad.
We might have 3, 4, 5.
I don't know that
Unfinished projects.
being good stewards makes you ever look bad, just for the record. But I also don't want to get in a situation where, as we did when I first came on the board, there was an expression used, kicking the can, by one of the board members pretty consistently. I want to make sure that we're not robbing from the capital plan, or that we're not refreshing just for the sake of trying to meet this hypothetical dateline, that I think that if we're honest and transparent with the public, and they certainly are experiencing the same thing we're experiencing.
Sure.
And I will tell you what's more important to me than anything else is, and we see it in our bond rating, we see it, actually, there was an article where Mineola is almost completely out of debt. The fact that we have the pay-as-you-go has demonstrated over time both money back in the classroom and has given the public trust with what stewards we are. So That's just kind of an overview of, as you're putting together your capital plan.
Well, and this is, I mean, so releasing the capital renewal, I will say, I always thought of it as this is money that we have available, and this would be a great way to allocate it. Is it honestly, and that was back when I thought we had that money available, right? Is it absolutely 100% necessary? No. Basic maintenance is absolutely 100% necessary. And to me, keeping up with the sales tax projects is necessary.
Keeping them
But
in
it
their
is
order.
within, what's
In
that?
their order is important to me.
Yeah, okay,
If the timeline slips and
Mm-hmm.
we're transparent with the public of these are the dollars we have, and we're pay-as-you-go, I mean, we did it at Fruitland Park years ago
Mm-hmm.
when they were screaming to redo the school. We went and explained to them, when we have the money, and everybody
Right.
sat down and went, yeah, we get it. Because people have wallets and budgets at home, too.
sure. Well, and this is a way to do it within the pay-as-you-go system. I mean, you know, we're not asking to borrow anything to keep sales tax. And quite frankly, I mean, I'll be honest, if things don't change, it could be that in 2030, there are still one or two projects that we haven't been able to do.
Which I think you sell it
at
then,
that
that you
point.
need the money, the renewal for that. But where does the new high school and this whole, are you going to be
So that
talking
is
about
an
that?
impact fee project.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so that is, you know, that is another
Big
story.
conversation.
That's another big
But it's going to be part of your
conversation.
5-year, though, is that?
It always is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, and when we are able to build that, I think that is a big conversation. That's not necessarily a pay-as-you-go conversation. But,
It's
because
a
our,
pay-as-you-go right now, just so you know.
it's pay-as-you-go right now.
Well, that's why-
Exactly.
Why would we
Yes,
move
it will not-
dollars that we may need for the high school?
Because these dollars aren't for the high school,
No.
right?
No,
Anything.
You're right.
no.
So,
These are not for the high school.
what are some examples of that this capital renewal would cover that basic maintenance would not? Like, what would we be foregoing at some of
So
these
I think
schools?
the thought process at the time was that you could go in and say you needed like window replacements. You know, your windows are 25 years old, you want to do window replacements. You want to go in and rewire the school. You, maybe a roof replacement because, you know, 25 years on a roof and then you want to go through and replace that roof again and then get another 25 or 30 years out of it. So it was more of that kind of major thing. You know, all of these, a lot of those things with basic maintenance, we can get more years out of them.
So we have maintenance dollars, and then we have these dollars, and we're pulling from this pot over here, and we're leaving this pot alone.
We're leaving the basic maintenance alone.
We're leaving the basic maintenance alone, and if we end capital renewal, we will increase the basic maintenance budget.
Some of those dollars will move too. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Sales tax. So then you have a chiller or HVAC or something. That's not capital refresh, that is basic maintenance. Is that right?
It would become basic maintenance. I mean,
'Cause
you
that's
know.
the kind of stuff when we talked about kicking the can, like that was all the time. That was every week's conversation of,
and-
okay, well, let's kick this can, let's kick that can.
We don't need
Right.
buses.
That's right, we don't
Yeah.
need buses for the next 10 years.
And it's trying to keep up that continuous level of both maintenance
Mm-hmm.
and buses and, you know, those general expenditures.
So this doesn't touch buses.
No,
We'll still be continuing
no, I mean,
to
I don't see any,
refresh our fleet then.
I don't anticipate any changes to buses. It is literally trying to take the capital renewal, which quite frankly, the other thing is, you know, we were allocating $4 or $5 million a school. That doesn't go nearly as far as it was before. So, you know, it's just kind of diverting some of that back into sales tax and maintenance, basic maintenance, and trying to keep those projects going.
I think it'd be very interesting to me to see what that, in your mind, what that begins to look like, pushing some of these projects.
Okay. Well, I can certainly, as long as you're okay with that thought process, I can certainly come back with a draft of the capital plan, maybe even a little earlier than June, so that you can have an idea what it looks like. I will say, so there's a couple other things that I did want to talk about as well. The Windy Hill Middle School addition, as you saw from the attendance boundary adjustments, I think we actually have bought some time on that. As we add K-8s and the charter schools add K-8s, we are adding middle school capacity. We actually had quite a bit of middle school capacity kind of when we started this round, and so we've added to it. So I think at the Windy Hill, we had proposed an addition just because of timing. I think it's still a high-growth area, but I think we have bought some time. So rather than go ahead and do that addition right now, I'd like to keep it in mind towards the outer years, continue to monitor that situation, but go ahead and put that addition off for now. Because we have opened up capacity through all of this attendance boundary shift that we're proposing.
Maybe a Grassy Lake addition would be a better use.
Maybe, maybe. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about, Eustis Elementary School. So they are up for design funding. And when, we went out to talk about the scope of work and what that looks like, it was very clear that we don't necessarily know what the scope of work is, right? So there's a lot of concerns at that school around the historic building that's there, the values that the community places on that school, and whether that value lies in the building or whether it lies in its role as an educational center for the community. So what I would like to look at over this next year is go ahead and get an architect on board through our regular RFQ process so that architect could move on. But phase one of this project would actually be a more robust master planning process. So basically going out to the community, having some open town hall meetings, some charrette-style meetings with that community, with the faculty, the staff, the city, bringing in everybody and really talking about what it is that is important at Eustis Elementary, because if we keep the old building, that has one whole set of implications. If we don't, then that has a whole different set of implications. So basically, that is kind of my thought and what I wanted to.
That was very profound. Do we now own all the property that we need?
We do not. We have not been able to arrive. So the Schloboms are willing to sell, but they do feel like, they need to be made whole when they move. And that is not going to be the appraised value of their house. That is up to the board. The other thing that I would like to look at as I go through, because I don't want to slow down the sales tax projects too much, is I'd like to see what moving Eustis High and seeing if either we can move that forward or if we can run them parallel and kind of, because otherwise, the way that it's structured right now is it's Eustis Elementary School and then it's Eustis High School. If we're not going to expend that funding for Eustis Elementary School for a little bit longer, then maybe there's some opportunities that get opened up there. And so, unless you have any concerns, that would be something that I would explore in this draft of the capital plan.
So I'm assuming when you talk about the moving Eustis High, that includes the Kurt Wright Center.
It includes doing the addition at Eustis High School, which would replace the Kurt Wright Center as the 9th grade center.
Okay, and would leave the Kurt Wright Center vacant.
And it would leave the Kurt Wright Center vacant, yes.
Well, I just feel like I need to state again publicly for the record, there is a widespread feeling in the Eustis community that they want to retain that as an educational facility with some kind of student present. So I would just ask that the board please keep that in mind. They are very vocal about that.
I think that's a
Sounds like a familiar story.
Yeah. So you've been there.
So I think that's a conversation that, what's the best educational use as we go forward.
Which was one of the reasons that we wanted to talk about it today, so that we could begin some of those conversations with having the public be aware of what we're thinking. So,
Is the thought that it would be more on the model of what we're doing in Claremont? Would that-
I think they would find that extremely amenable. I think they just want it to remain an educational facility.
Superintendent, do you have any thoughts about it?
Our hope was always something that we could replicate in the center of
Yeah, I
the
think
of the
it's
county.
brilliant.
So, yeah, so possibly.
Cool.
I think if that could happen, there would be a lot of happy people.
All right, well, it sounds like unless there are any concerns that I'm not hearing right now, then I kind of have direction to move forward with drafting something and coming back, and let's see what it looks like with those proposed changes.
Now, I don't want to get deep into the high school conversation. Just a quick update. Where are we on the closing? What kind of timeline are we still looking at? That's the question everybody's always asking.
So, yeah, if you follow Facebook posts,
Like, nobody believes we're ever going to build a high school down there.
there are times when I have my doubts. So basically, really the problem there is that, so our timeline is a little more aggressive than the developers. We are looking for a piece of land that has both utility access and has decent road access, right? So we have been working with Mr. Carr, we have been trying, but we are more aggressive than he is. So basically, we have had a lot of back and forth. We've had a draft contract for, 2 years plus. And, we are trying, the city and the county are supporting us in trying to make sure that we get something soon and that we get something that meets our needs. So we are pursuing that avenue. We also always have our eyes open to see if there are other options, but right now that appears to be the best option. So we are pursuing it. The city and county are supporting us in trying to get us to contract.
What is Pinecrest? What's their status of building a high school?
I have no idea.
Haven't heard from them in a while.
And they're based out of the college right now, right? Is that right? But they have property.
They have not communicated anything to,
I know about that, because I've had the same kind of interrogatives as to where we are with the high school, and we're at,
We got, what, 2,800 kids coming up at Eastridge?
Eastridge is, I think probably, they are projected, they are at 2764 as of this year, and by 2028, they are projected at 2881. So they are, all of our South County high schools are growing very, very quickly. And so, I think I've been fairly clear that I feel like we need one sooner rather than later, but we are working within the parameters of the situation that we're in, so.
great work, Kelly.
All right,
Okay.
thank you
Thank you,
very
ma'am.
much. I appreciate you.
We appreciate you. Mr. Ward, budget update?
Short and sweet. Thanks again for the opportunity to come back up here real quick.
Yeah, right?
So I've got on there, and I don't know if we can blow that up anymore or not, but that is just show the top. That is the FEFP comparison I do every year. I just want to give you a real quick update, kind of give you a bottom line. They held our required local effort steady this year, which means that they didn't adjust it down as a partial rollback, as they have started doing in the late 2016 through 22. So that's good news. And then they increased our base student allocation, $191.25 per student. which is a 3.72% increase, which that's good, comparable to where they normally go. I think last year was a little over 1.25, 1.4, something like that. So this year we got a little bit more of a bump. They didn't do anything crazy like last year where they started rolling a lot of things into the BSA to artificially inflate it. So no fancy shell games with that this year. We're still below the DCD, which they brought us up to 0. So you see we got $26.2 million additional in our funding. Again, most of that is based on the increase in students, and we're not really seeing that much of an increase in our traditional school students. We're seeing more increase in the scholarships, and we're seeing an increase in charters. Our schools overall are kind of holding kind of steady. So a lot of that $26 million will not go to us. They're still doing the 0.748 mil discretionary compression. That brings us up to average with the state, but it does not bring those that are higher than average. It does not bring them down. It's different than the required local effort. So again, we get brought up to state average, but there are other districts out there that get even more, and so they have an advantage. They did add some additional funding this year to Safe Schools and the mental health allocation, and then the rest of it is they kind of held the same formula from the previous year. And if you'll scroll down a little bit more. All the way to the little bit, yep, right there, perfect. So, so overall, you'll see that we have a $221 per student increase over prior year. If you multiply that by our district projected FTE, this is our schools, this doesn't include charters, doesn't include scholarships, 40,674 weighted. That is almost a $9 million increase in our revenue. The other good news from the state this year is our FRS rates. They were adjusted slightly. They're not that much of an adjustment like we saw last year, so it wasn't that much of an increase. What we are expecting this upcoming year, we just had a conversation with our actuary on our on our health insurance fund, and they're projecting a 12.5% increase in our cost in our insurance fund. So to mitigate that increase, it would be approximately at this point in time $4.6 million increase on our general fund. So that would deduct from that $9 million. And then we are still having to do the TSIA. It's now a portion of our base student allocation. And our portion, not including the charters, would be $2.7 million, which leaves us about $1.5 million in available funding, which is not bad because if you'll remember last year, it was actually a negative by the time we deducted everything. So we at least have a positive this year. So I just wanted to give you guys a real quick update on where we are starting with. Obviously, this impacts the majority of our revenue for our district and as we're going through our budget process this year. So any questions on FEFP this year? Fun stuff.
No questions?
Any comments from Bill about compression this year?
Or when we're
Well,
going to see
I already
the
know we kind of got screwed on that, so I don't want to talk about it, but I am interested. If you now have solid numbers, I would like to populate my spreadsheets.
Yes, sir. I don't have them yet, but I'll work on that for you.
Okay, thanks.
Spreadsheet. Okay, well, that's really all I had planned for the budget update for now, because we're going through the process of building everything up. And of course, as we build those and put them on the web, I will inform you and both of our union presidents so that everybody has all the information at the same time.
Thank you. No questions? Wow.
Okay.
We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mathias, any comments?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Dodd?
No, not today.
Ms. Luke?
I wanted to tell Kelly and Helen and Vicky, thank you. They helped me last week in regards to my dissertation completion and with the poster they printed my poster for me, and then they let us use easels for the big presentation at the college. And so I did take them some cookies, which I heard Mr. Brandyberg ate. It's fine. But they were really, really, really helpful, and I'm very thankful. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Brandyberg?
Nothing to add, no.
I don't have any. Madam Superintendent?
Good.
Mr. Cole?
No, ma'am.
Well, with that said, if nothing further, we will adjourn the meeting.